The story begins with a young man, Ryudo. In the spring of his 16th year, he was tending the crops in his father's field. He tried to use green magic to draw from the plant, extract all the moisture down to the last drop. However, as he expected, green magic was only the power to give, and he wondered how everything could be much simpler if he already knew how to use another magic. But just then, a man from behind called him and informed him that a letter had just arrived from the Exiled Academy of the royal capital. Later, returning to the city, he saw that a large crowd had gathered. Everyone was trembling with joy as soon as they learned that the village genius Ryudo had finally been accepted to the prestigious Royal Vital Magic Academy. In Porto's village, this happened for the first time, and the fact that he received a recommendation from one of the great people in the capital, it was truly grand. Everyone was incredibly happy for him, and he thanked each one for their warm words. Then a girl named Nia approached him and asked him to accept an amulet she had made, praying for his safety. He gladly took it and promised to protect it, but she became so upset and began to cry. He ordered him to take care of himself, eat properly, and all this while he himself tried to calm her down. For now, the two men simply enjoyed the show. They laughed and hinted to her that if she really cared about him so much, she should follow him. Jokes aside, he promised Mia that he would give his all at the Royal Academy to become a true mage. And for now, he asked her not to cry and just smile. She stopped crying, smiled, and said she would gladly wait for him. But despite this, his mother also approached and assured there was no need to worry about home at all. She only wanted him to give his all and give everything at the academy. The people from the village felt the same all as one joyfully shouted aloud at that very moment. He was the best both in the whole village, in magic and in studies, and wished him all the best in his future journey to the royal capital. Thus passed the night of celebrations, and the day came when he was leaving. He got into the carriage and said goodbye to everyone. And just as he was about to set off, a girl watched him from afar atop a tree and silently said goodbye. For now, Ryudo, traveling the road to the capital, seized this chance and aimed for his goal, to become a chamberlain who would protect the kingdom of Vienna and make his village proud of him. Next, a sharp cut. 4 years later, when he was 20, he stood before the academy director, who angrily shouted at him and threw a pile of papers, showing all the chaos he had caused. These were battle reports, and according to them, Ryudo had not stood on the front line at all. He failed to prove himself where it mattered. Everything he did was running around with his rural, heroic horses, as if that could replace real work. When the director Alphonse reread those reports, he said straight to his face, he had smeared the academy's emblem with dirt, the pride of their nation. 4 years ago, everyone buzzed about how he received a personal recommendation from the Heavenly Star King and was admitted from outside the royal capital. And he was also considered the first green magic user in the 1,000-year history of the Royal Vader Magic Academy. But now it became clear, all of this was just a forgery covering up a worthless fool like him. Alphonses shouted incessantly that a mage who brought chaos to the battlefield had no value at all, while Ryudo tried to convince him that he was just casting support magic so their comrades would not suffer any injuries. But he brushed off the explanations and declared, a green mage in the wastelands is worth even less than a kamasi. From the reports, it became completely obvious. He had not a shred of talent. He only inquired whether he could master at least one spell of another color. The answer was already quite clear, but despite everything the director said, this country cannot afford to hide talent. So he announced that the Royal Academy did not need people like him and expelled him. Ryudo felt irritation but had nothing to say, and he simply took and walked away from the main mentor. Later, when he was already about to pack his things, the noble Lady Felice visited him and asked directly if he was really ready to give up so easily. He replied that nothing could be done here. The Chancellor himself announced his expulsion. But these words only fueled her even more, and she shouted that the Chancellor knew nothing about him and had no right to insult him at all. Only she knew that his support magic was the only thing that reduced their comrades' losses to zero. She could not understand why he let others say whatever they wanted about him. And it all looked as if they were simply laughing at him, calling him a useless fool, but he only smiled quietly in response. He remembered it had already been 4 years since the day he arrived here, and then in his thoughts he told himself just a lucky guy, an ordinary boy who managed to survive in an academy full of geniuses. Even Felice, whom everyone called a once-in-a-century genius, studied alongside him, and for that he was truly grateful to her. But she stopped him right there and asked, had he really already forgotten that he was the first man, besides her father, who actually defeated her? She even got a little emotional. And he, seeing this, asked, "How are you? Are you okay?" She quickly hid her face, showing him it means nothing, while Ryudo valued her for thinking so highly of him. And even when she called it his victory, he immediately reminded her everything happened only because she chose conditions favorable to him. She didn't care, and she declared, even if everything was divided equally, no one else could touch her even with a finger. Later, he assured her that he had already thought it through, what he would do after leaving this place, because there is more than one way he can support the kingdom. He picked up the dried flower and reminded her of one thing: whoever stands before him, he will not lose to anyone. It was green magic, and he proved it with his own hands. He used green magic again to make that flower shine. Green magic, liat magic with high affinity, so it can only be used with green mana produced by forest plants. But as soon as he leaves the forest where the green goddess actually lived, her influence sharply diminishes. To contain the threat of the gates which connect other worlds and spawn monsters, a magical court and the Ninth Order were created. However, at the sites of unrest near the gates in wastelands or cities, no green mana could be found anymore. Feli still did not like where the conversation was heading, but he simply thanked once again and asked to take the flower he was holding in his hands. She, however, said that she did not really like the ornaments. But he explained his Himari flower is from his hometown Portos. She only had to accept this flower filled with green magic. Feli sincerely believed that he would finally feel it, that the academy still made sense. She no longer argued and agreed to listen. Then he stepped closer, took the flower, and hid it in his hair. She was already beginning to love it and thanked him, promising to always protect his flower. It was then that two boys entered the room, Thomas and Eric, and were also looking for Ryudo, but as soon as they saw him next to Feli's, they immediately guessed that they were probably interrupting someone. So they quickly decided to take their leave and let the two continue, but Ryudo stopped them and said it was nothing, while Feli's on the other side was simply dying of embarrassment. Two more boys entered. They had all already heard the news. He was expelled from the academy. In any case, they did not want him to leave without saying goodbye, and Thomas even brought his proud wine who wanted to drink with him before he left, so they all sat together with a glass. He felt sincere gratitude to all his friends. He thanked each one and promised to support them all with his harvests. Eventually, the time came to finally leave the academy, and a group of guards came to escort him out. He looked back one last time at the place where he had spent the last 4 years and was ready to move forward, leaving everything behind. Returning in the carriage to his village, he could not stop thinking about what he would say to everyone as soon as he arrived home. They were so happy when he entered the Royal Academy. In the village, everyone was very kind, so he hardly doubted that they would still accept him as if nothing had happened. But he understood something else. If he returned like this, he would simply let them down. Meanwhile, one of the knights, looking back, asked his captain why they had to drag such a boring mission guarding a defector. The second knight immediately tugged him and said, "Having the opportunity to guard such a talented mage is already an honor." The captain remained cold and simply told both their duty was to carry out any mission assigned to them. Then the captain noticed the frozen, confused, and exhausted expression on Ryudo's face and asked if something was bothering him. Ryudo replied that even if he was considered a failure, he still thought about how he could be useful to the kingdom. And for that, he had already decided to carve knightly nobility into the very heart so that there would be no room for doubt. After these words, all three guards were a little confused. And this brought a big smile to the captain's face. He assured him that he had nothing to worry about. He would be proudly accompanied to his village. Later, until they continued moving forward, Ryudo fell asleep in the carriage. But as soon as everything quieted down, a loud bam thundered and the carriage stopped. He quickly opened the door to find out what had happened when the captain suddenly lunged back and crashed into the carriage with force. He was beaten badly, but despite everything, he informed Ryudo that a pack of moon wolves attacked them and ordered to hide immediately. He rushed to help the captain while two other knights still watched in shock. They couldn't comprehend that wolves were capable not only of biting, but also piercing metal armor with their bites as if it were a trifle. Ahead already towered the moon walls, a magical creature whose rage changes with the phases of the moon. But while they were distracted, they had already managed to take several of their horses. The captain stood up. Being a proud knight of the Kingdom of Vienna, he unconditionally refused to fall to some so-called moon she-wolf. He walked straight at them and Ryudo tried to stop him, but the captain, on the contrary, stubbornly decided to show what it really means to be a knight. As long as he could swing his sword, he had no thought of turning his back to the enemy, so with that in mind, he charged into an attack against the moon wolves. Ryudo froze with admiration. His fencing was so beautiful, and even on a full moon night he was smashing wolves without a chance, while the two other knights also felt the desire awakening in them to join the fight. Just as he raised his sword to behead one of the wolves, everything happened suddenly. Another one jumped up almost immediately and attacked him from behind. He crashed into the carriage. The captain dropped his sword and the wolf picked it up in its teeth, and the Kastari helped the captain but still could not believe it. Even the captain's skill with the rapier gave no chance against them, so they decided to retreat immediately. However, the captain refused and declared that abandoning the mission and fleeing from the enemy was dishonorable at night. He was not going to betray the oath of loyalty and decided to complete this task at any cost. And it was at that moment Ryudo called out to the moon wolves and tried to attract their attention to himself. He threw a fireball spell at them, but they, as if nothing had happened, effortlessly deflected the attack. But this angered them, and just as he had calculated, they turned the entire strike on him. Ryudo immediately ordered the knights to seize the moment and move into the forest, promising that he would deal with these wolves. The captain was even taken aback. It turned out he also knew red magic, but they heeded the advice and plunged into the forest. He himself thought that there was no mastery here and the fireball just created was only a decoy. However, this was the only way to force them to retreat. He did not want to endanger the captain's life, especially with such a deep wound. Then the wolf smashed the lantern that stood there and extinguished the fire. He was a little surprised as he began to realize these wolves were more cunning than he had thought. In complete darkness ahead, he saw nothing, and not even a breath could be heard. The walls merged with the darkness of the night and prepared an ambush. It was also obvious even knights fought with these wolves, who on the open field in combat skill were several levels above him. However, finding himself in the forest area, he felt his green magic there had no limits. So he cast one of his spells to accurately determine the location of the wolves. Despite the complete darkness, he was shocked. All three were already aimed to attack coordinated together. And he immediately decided to deprive them of freedom as the first thing, and used his root and tangle spell to trap them in the roots. But all of them managed to quietly bypass it, and then they began to circle around him. In a moment, they closed into a ring around him and struck together. But very quickly they felt something went wrong. Ryudo drew his sword and pushed them all back. It turned out that he had already put his green magic into action. He crafted a whole armor for himself from roots. Squinting, he told the wolves that this portywood armor infused with green mana was stronger even than metal plates, and immediately they all sprang into action even more fiercely. He also realized if he lost here, then the knights would be in danger too. So he did not retreat and decided to stop those moon wolves right here. The fight did not subside in three wolves. The wolves continued to press on him from all sides. He managed to intercept and extinguish their blows, but still never managed to hit accurately even once. He had already calculated everything. When there were three of them against one, sword skills would not be enough, so he decided to take them down one by one to seize the initiative. But as soon as he started playing like that, one of them grabbed his leg. The armor covered that neck in the armor and he did not receive any damage. But he could no longer move. Another wolf caught that moment, sneaked closer and bit his arm. After that, he did just that. The sword no longer obeyed and he got stuck in place. The last wolf attacked him from behind, and when there were almost no other chances left, he felt doomed. He unleashed a whole series of attacks aimed at one thing, to knock all of them out of the game without exception. But before he could fully complete the spell, all three together sharply retreated and instantly broke the distance. Ryudo froze completely stunned. It became obvious the matter was not only in speed. They were also incredibly skilled at sensing magic, so holding back their movements would be extremely difficult. Moreover, endurance and mana are not limitless, and he knew it. A prolonged fight would inevitably drive him into a disadvantageous position. Suddenly, one wolf sprang from its place and rushed straight at him, leaped up close, hit and pushed him back until he flew. He swung again to attack them with magic, but they, as before, jumped up to dodge and separate. And this was exactly what he had been striving for from them, because he was waiting for this very moment. He powered the sword with green magic, and he knocked all three of them down through in flight and smashed them against the ground. Although it was a complete adventure, he still thought, what if it works? And then, when he looked closer, he was struck by shock. They were still moving even after that, even when the power of this spell was already beyond Narm. He tried to hold them even tighter and used green magic. But he had already seen that the mana was on the home stretch, but he could not stop. There would be no other such chance. So he continued to press and stubbornly tried to immobilize them, squeezing at the roots until he sat down to rest and could not believe that it really worked. He poured into everything he had and believed. Even mighty moon wolves would at least budge from the spot by this measure. And then suddenly the walls tore off from those roots as if they had never existed at all. And he froze completely, utterly stunned. When the wolves gathered again around, he could no longer pull anything from his sleeves and had no idea if this was really the end right now. His mana was almost exhausted and the magical armor had dimmed. His body was barely cold, his throat dry. At that moment, only one thought spun in his head: how good it would be to get a chance to taste Nia's stew once more. It was then that he saw the amulet Mia had given him when he left the village all those years ago. And memories poured like a waterfall, how Mia, his mother, and all the people in the village believed that he was the best in the whole village and placed great hopes on him. Thinking of everyone who had trusted him, he refused to die there. He did not want everyone in the village to eventually stab each other because of him, and this very thought relentlessly lived in his head. He rushed straight forward at the moon wolves. Suddenly a girl fell from the sky and she fell right on him, tightly hugged her tightly, and was happy to see him after such a long separation, and he was also happy to see her. At first he pointed to the wolves and said that they were actually a bit stuck there. Vivian pursed her lips as if he was changing the subject again and added that she had already seen those 3 dogs too. He corrected her, those were not just some dogs, moon wolves, and besides, the night was a full moon. But Vivian, on her part, waved her hand indifferently. For her, they were just pests that got in her way. Looking at him ominously, she suggested knocking down those 3 in a moment simply because they could. He told her again it's not as simple as she thinks and that he had already spent all his mana. But she didn't care. She again noted that he still had a lot of mana that he could use. She stepped very close and insisted, let them perform their usual ritual. But he stopped her right there and reminded her that it was 10 years ago and now he was no longer a child. But as soon as she heard these words, it was as if she broke through. She became wildly angry and snapped that she had been waiting for this for too long. While he was trying to calm her down and reminded her of what they had already agreed upon, the ritual was no longer needed. Obviously, she was not going to listen to any logic. She wanted to do it for the sake of the process itself, and she started slapping him on the head. She told him to simply stop it. Then she touched his cheek with a kiss, and that was it. Her ritual was finally over as soon as she did it. He felt an incredible amount of mana coursing through his body. It was just like the omnipotence that overwhelmed him when he merged with the green goddess Vivian. It seemed incredibly nostalgic to him, and as always, he felt a colossal amount of mana within himself. It was all thanks to her. She was simply happy that she could help him. Suddenly, a wolf jumped on him from behind and bit his arm. But suddenly, Ryudo disappeared in an instant as if he had sunk into the ground, leaving only leaves behind. 3 wolves got confused and started sniffing the trail in search of his scent. It turns out, as soon as he became one of the Vidian, he learned to dissolve into the greatest nature itself, and now he had full control over the entire forest. Then he noticed how an image of an unknown spell was growing right before his eyes in his mind. And it seemed to him as if he already knew what it was capable of, so he cast this spell on a tree. And suddenly the whole tree began to change, transforming right before his eyes. It turned into a walking giant. And Ryudo was stunned. Everything looked so bizarre that he could not believe it. This happened thanks to his own magic. But Vidian assured him that he had actually combined black magic and green magic together. The name of this spell was Living Forest, while the giant was preparing to smash 3 wolves to pieces. Vidian sat in the back seat and enjoyed the spectacle, even feeling the desire to see those wolves ground to dust. Ryudo tried to stop him, thinking it was a bit too much, but he had very little time left. And when he saw the wolves trembling for their lives before they met the giant's fist, he remembered something from the times when he was still just a child, how his father took him into the wild to teach him hunting, and when they caught a hare, he said, "Finish the job, end it." Little Ryudo was nervous and asked his dad if they really had to do it, because he was already beginning to feel guilty for the rabbit. And the father calmly reminded, people live because they take life either from plants or from animals, so they have always used every part of the prey and wasted nothing. In simple words, he explained the instruction to him: unnecessary killing must never happen. And having said this, the father simply took and killed a rabbit. While skinning the rabbit, Ryudo did not feel good at all, but he knew it was necessary. His father also said, never, under any circumstances, forget this feeling. His heart was stronger and kinder than anyone else's. And you only want him to hold on to this and not change. And now, returning to the present, he no longer felt any hostility from those moonlit walls. And there was no need to kill them, so he quickly used magic and took control of the green giant, and changed the trajectory of his strike. The walls barely stood after the blow. He could have easily knocked them down right there. Alrido sighed with relief. Finally, it was clear that they were all okay, and the wolves had fled from that place. Vivian asked why he did it, and he replied that these wolves were already exhausted from the mana, so they would not attack people for some time. Therefore, there was no need to rush to eliminate them yet. Then he climbed down from the green giant and released the spell. Transform the giant back into a tree just like before. Ryudo was simply glad that everything ended without losses because he was already sure. During this fight, the whole forest would definitely be destroyed, but fortunately, nothing like that happened. Suddenly, Vivian also ran outside and hugged Kin tightly again, officially welcoming him back home. Ryudo was also insanely happy to see her after so long, and sincerely thanked her for helping him in this fight. As he expected, the mana discharge from the green goddess was simply incredible. And she replied that it was obvious anyway, since she had been the goddess here for a very long time. But the main thing she emphasized, the green giant spell he just used could not be repeated by any ordinary man. But he was not like everyone else. Inside him lived a person of volume huge like an ocean. Ryudo thanked her for the compliment, but at the same time reminded her that in the royal capital he was completely helpless. So it did not matter, but she reminded him, no matter how amazing green magic was, outside the forest it almost does not work. But whatever the case, she assured him, there was no need to worry anymore as long as she and the forest were with him. Stopping with a frightening look, she suggested they go and destroy that royal magical academy that despised Ryudo and threw him out. He felt as if a cold shiver ran down his spine, and he stopped her right there. He said that this was not needed at all, and he even added she could not get out of here, and anger twisted her even more. For now, let's leave it at that, but he also reported that until this time he was guarded by a group of knights, and now they had set off for the capital. Everyone was wounded, so now they were left alone in the forest full of monsters. He asked her to help and save those knights. She did not want to, but still agreed simply because he asked her to do it. Then the action shifted to the knights. They were stuck in the forest and were carrying the wounded captain. They were afraid to make their way through this creepy forest at night, and they could not wait until morning. The captain's wounds did not allow it. Suddenly they noticed that the forest itself was moving, and it cleared a bright path for them. Seeing this, the knights beamed with joy and were sure this was the will of the green goddess. So they left the forest and prayed that Ryudo was also safe. As soon as he remembered this and returned to Vivian and Ryudo, he thanked her for helping those knights. And she replied that even after all this time, he was still so handsome. However, she was happy. He had not changed at all. She was simply afraid that in the city he might lose his way and become a bad person. He admitted the capital really is full of different people, but when it comes to magic, he is still completely hopeless. That's why he was kicked out of the academy. Now he has to return with nothing, just like that. However, she immediately stated that this was completely untrue. She saw how a striking shift happened in him from the moment he first left the village. As soon as he managed to use black magic, white magic, and even red and blue, it was a real miracle for him. He snapped at her and said that she trusted him too much because he can't even properly use any of them. But she disagreed. He had just breathed life into a huge tree, and doing that was impossible without black magic that controls life itself. Moreover, she felt all of this inside him, an incredible flow of green mana, and also how tiny specks of different mana were sprouting inside him, and she had never seen anything like it. It was immediately clear he had worked hard in the royal capital. And she praised him, gently stroking his head while he stood as if his mouth was dry and he couldn't say a word. He thanked her for the compliments, but immediately felt his head spinning as if his strength was rapidly melting away. He guessed this must have been the backlash from the magic he had just used, so Vivian even apologized for getting carried away. She was too happy to see him and he realized it, but for now he only asked, lend her a shoulder. Later he did return to the village and he was greeted excitedly because everyone was sure. Since he succeeded in everything, he was supposed to be appointed to the Magic Corps or something similar. But with deep regret, he apologized to everyone for breaking their hopes and admitted his grades were so terrible that the director had already announced his expulsion. Hearing this, everyone was shocked and at first thought he was joking. After all, he was still considered the pride of the village. They incessantly questioned him. Maybe he didn't like the city's air, or he was bullied at the academy, or something happened. They demanded to know exactly what happened and when. Suddenly, Vivian came out and sweetly hugged him, but immediately everyone pounced with questions. If he really felt so bad, then what was he doing with that girl next to him? Ruto was just as stunned and had no idea at all what she was actually doing there. For now, on the contrary, she just wanted to give him the cold shoulder. His mother could not believe what she saw. He had not sent her a single letter for 4 years. And the fact that he succumbed to temptations in the royal capital that seemed impossible. Other villagers also began to wonder, did he betray them after reaching the big city while trying to explain everything to them? But then, suddenly, Vivian said that literally days ago they became one for the first time in their lives. And this completely threw him off track because there was no explanation. On the contrary, everything became even more complicated. Mia also started crying upon hearing this and called him a traitor. While he was already beginning to panic and tried to explain to everyone that it was not like that, until he finally woke up. And he understood all this was just a bad dream. That one dream made him even more fearful about returning to Portos. Suddenly Vivian approached him and asked what dream he had seen. He was surprised to see her so close, and she asked why he was acting as if he had seen a ghost or something similar when she had specially tried to get him a lup pillow. His head still hurt as if it had been beaten, and he understood. This was the consequence of overdoing it with the Mano engine that night. Meanwhile, Vivian was apologizing again for making him suffer so much. She explained there was no need to worry because these symptoms were just the result of control problems. He stubbornly told himself, even when he escaped death, he did not notice reality changing even a little. And he had no idea what to do next. Just then, Vidin took his hand and quietly asked if from now on they could always be together. He hesitated for a moment and ran through a simple thought in his head. There was nowhere to return to at least now when he had let everyone down. So he nodded and told her that for now he would stay in the village. She beamed from this. Finally they could play in the forest together like in the good old days. And as soon as that happened, she immediately suggested they hurry up and head to the village of Porti. Ryudo's face seemed to stretch a little and his expression shifted, so she asked what had happened. He replied that for him, the outcast, it would be strange to bring a girl home after all this time. She couldn't believe he was still worried about such things, but his attention instantly shifted to a completely different matter. When he saw the cat at the top of the tree, he was genuinely surprised. What was it doing there? Vivian explained that the animals in this forest find their own ways to survive even from monsters. These words made him bitter. He had no idea that the cat could be scared after seeing his magic the day before. And he decided to help climb the tree and saved the cat. She warned him, be careful because he still hasn't fully recovered. But he assured her there was nothing to worry about. He was not lacking skill in climbing. It was his selfless act again that made her honestly admit he had not changed a bit. Finally, he picked up the cat and apologized to him for scaring him so much. The cat responded with a gentle lick on his face, and Vivian, seeing this, felt a slight, unpleasantly sweet envy. She picked up the cat and reminded him that a stray must behave like a stray. After that, she forced him to run away from there. And Ryudo told her that there was nothing wrong with Thais except maybe leaning on someone a little. She asked if he really loved cats that much, and he replied that in his opinion, cats are very cute. Since that was the case, she decided to do exactly what he liked, and immediately turned to the cat. He was completely knocked off his feet when he saw it, because he never knew she was actually capable of something like that. So she could come to the village with him without any worries, and exactly like that, in her usual form. She did not know how to speak the human language, and strangely enough, it was even quite convenient. And in turn, she simply wanted to be near him, because she knew how kind he was to everyone, so she could not help but worry about him. Later, when Vivian was sitting on his shoulder, he finally made his way back. In front of him hung a neglected shield with a sign. And you remembered, it was the same sign near which all the villagers gathered to say goodbye to him on the day he first set out. Then everyone celebrated his departure, and even thinking about it was unbearable. He could not understand what face to wear now if he returned home with nothing. And then Vivian tried to cheer him up. He appreciated her attention. While he moved deeper into the village, she did not take her eyes off him. What struck him was something else. 4 years had passed and nothing had changed at all. The calm atmosphere around was nothing like the royal capital, so it became surprisingly cozy because of this. He saw a villager working in the field and suddenly remembered. It was at this time of year that villagers spread compost that had matured over the winter across the fields and dug the soil. He was overwhelmed with wild amazement. Everything looked the same as when he left. Finally, he reached his home. And he remembered how his mother always asked, "Do everything as best as you can," repeating that he did not need to worry about her even if he disappeared for some time. And even when Fellis once told him simply to go home for the holidays, he still chose to stay at the academy for extra classes to catch up with everyone. He kept thinking he would send her mother a letter any moment now as soon as he managed to gather at least some results. But in these 4 years, not a single chance arose. He did not send a single letter. He could not imagine at all what he would say to her as soon as he saw her own mother. Now he would have to tell her directly that he had failed, or first apologize for not being in touch for 4 years. Meanwhile, he immersed himself in his own thoughts, and the door suddenly opened. His mother appeared on the threshold. Her eyes widened sharply. She could not believe it was really him. He just snorted and said that he had returned home. His mother immediately hugged him tightly, so tightly that he almost lost his balance, and they both fell to the ground. He quickly apologized to her and asked if she was all right. She was truly incredibly happy to see him. Tears sparkled in her eyes and she welcomed him, accepting him back into the home. Then they both sat next to each other, and he told her everything that had happened to him. As soon as she heard what he had to go through, she felt very sorry for him, but among everything else, she could not understand how it was possible to just throw it aside so easily. And Alfredo, for his part, was surprised to see that she accepted him back so easily and that his worries had almost led to nothing. She immediately understood what he was thinking and added, he had always been strong in studies, and regarding green magic there was no mage who could surpass him. He agreed that was indeed true, but inside he still knew his green magic only worked in this particular environment around the village and only with Vivian's support. Then his mother noticed the cat that was staying nearby and asked if he had brought it from the capital. He explained, on the way back to the village, he just happened to come across her in the forest. And his mother was quite surprised to hear that he had actually picked her up in the forest, Porthos. The cat behaved so elegantly that she was immediately sure it was definitely from the capital. She asked if he had already given her a name, and he, although he hadn't really thought about it, he quickly came up with a name and told her that her name was Vidi. His mother absolutely. He was absolutely alive with this name because it was very similar to the patron deity of this village. Meanwhile, Vivian nervously chuckled. He had already seen that Vivian did not like this name at all. After that, he asked her if they had fresh milk that they could give Vivi, and she agreed. It was really a great idea. Viv drank fresh milk, and she just tasted it. She could not believe how incredibly delicious it was. Ryudo could also say that she really likes this milk. And he also said that in the village of Padola there is fresh milk in products and that in fact they are the best on the entire continent. But his mother doubted, and she asked, doesn't the capital attract first-class chefs and the freshest ingredients? To which he replied, it does, but time is something you cannot buy. Around the capital, the green manna withered and turned into complete barrenness. There was still water, but food still had to be brought from distant places. Even that honeyed apple that had just been on their dining table, and the capital itself, which could not get anything fresh at all. He took a bite of that honeyed apple and immediately felt nostalgia, because he finally remembered what it used to taste like before. Even the honey apples in the royal capital were always old and dried out. And especially recently, the food distribution stopped. Monsters kept climbing over the gates, so all they could do was chew dried meat and withered vegetables. He wanted both Phillies and all his friends to also taste these fresh crops. After that, his mother decided to go to the fields. And he suggested going with her. Although quite some time had passed, he was sure he would find something where he could help her. But his mother advised him to just rest for a while. He had just returned from a long journey, and in spring, the workload, in his opinion, was too heavy. Precisely because it was spring, he was not going to fall behind and could not truly relax until he started doing at least something. Moreover, he already felt well. In these 4 years he had achieved nothing, despite the great expectations placed on him. But his mother did not share these thoughts at all. With a gentle smile, she assured him that she did not consider all he had done to be in vain, and these words seemed to immediately leave him speechless. But if he really wanted to help, his mother ordered him to hurry and change clothes. How could he drag himself to farm work wearing such fine clothes? She pointed to the shelf, and explained that there she kept his father's clothes, and therefore, in her opinion, they should fit him perfectly. He did not quite understand and asked what she had just meant, but she just waved him off, saying she would wait for him outside. He changed into peasant clothes and still could not be happier. His father's work uniform fit him perfectly, as if it had been waiting for him. even if he could not please his father by joining the magical army. But he was not going to give up. He wanted to be useful in another way. So, without wasting time, he decided to use the fields and these clumps. While Mia was wandering around the village from one corner to another, as if a few steps were enough for her to change fate. As soon as she caught the conversation of a few uncles on the road saying that someone in Magic Academy uniform had arrived in the village, all attention focused on one point. Without a doubt, Mia already knew. It had to be Rudo who returned to the village. And she ran headlong, full speed to his house. She couldn't wait to see him after all this time. Next, they tell a bit of the history of the village Porto. Once it was a place tightly bound by winter, and now only traces of snowdrifts remained, still stretching in the shade of the trees. Snow, frost, and drought alternated in turn, and the soil in the fields was compacted to stone. So to gather the summer harvest, the fields first had to be plowed again and again, and the soil softened. And only then fully matured compost was buried in the soil. He dug, leveled, and dug again. This was repeated over and over, just as Ryudo and his mother did. And before he could realize it, the sun had completely disappeared below the horizon. He sat down to rest and felt that exhaustion had reached his bones. He thought he had overdone it a bit. He was already sure tomorrow his muscles would ache. Vivi heard this and decided to help. She jumped on his shoulder and passed the message. But instead of relief, she essentially caused him even more pain. Suddenly, his mother approached him and thanked him for helping her, seeing that now it had become much easier for her. After the work was done, she suggested he go visit Mia. She had wanted to see him for a long time. Hearing her name, he remembered. Every time he was about to give up, she instilled courage in him and made him keep going. And for him, the taste of home was Naistu. His mother also teased him a little, saying that in these 4 years Mia had become incredibly beautiful. And he agreed that she had to do it, but he was not sure if it was the right time for their meeting, so he froze in confusion. His mother asked what was more important to him than his beloved childhood friend. At first he clearly explained to her that he and Mia were not like that at all. And when he returned to the village, he already knew for sure. First of all, he must go to one place. This was his father's field, and as soon as he said this, his mother was left surprised. She asked why he needed to go there since nothing could grow there anymore, but it was enough just to look into his eyes. And she saw he had made this decision finally and would not back down. So she did not argue and agreed to go with him. While they were walking along the road, he recalled how many times he had walked this very path with his mother as a child. The land left behind by his father and the fields that had been passed down through generations in their family were considered among the largest even among the villages of Portos, where the main occupation was farming. Once this field yielded the greatest harvest in the entire village, people worked together as a group tirelessly. Both songs and laughter never ceased for a moment. The taste of vegetables grown on this nourished land and harvested from pure streams was simply incredible. So merchants from the royal capital and other countries competed just to get those harvests. That's how much they were valued. And his mother remembered those times. She said that every day was filled with joy. She carried him on her back and his father stayed close by. But then she sharply brushed all that off and behaved as if no good memory remained from those days, and Rudo could not understand what she was even talking about. And he said that to this day no one has confirmed whether his father is dead or alive. About 10 years ago it became clear, in this kingdom the frequency of gates that spawn monsters sharply increased. Because of this, many people head to the royal capital for fame or quick wealth. Some go as soldiers, some become mercenaries, and the most common path is adventurer. And somewhere around the moment when this trend was just starting to pick up speed, his father suddenly disappeared. Like dominoes, youth after youth left the village and farm laborers quickly dwindled to nothing. But he and his mother, by some miracle, managed to hold their lands together. But not much time passed and he too rushed to the royal capital after his dream. But the result was a failure. The dream shattered right there and he deeply regretted that decision. Now, having returned home, he decided to paint a new dream across all this vast farmland. He wanted to prove that the words Felis said before leaving the academy were not a lie. And there was more than one way to support the kingdom. So the two finally reached their father's lands. And he was shocked at what it had turned into. There was no place left here for farming at all. And he could not even imagine that it would drag on so long, so far, so painfully changing everything. Now that he saw it with his own eyes, the mother repeated again, "This field is no longer suitable." All the time the village had been lacking people, so working on such a field was simply impossible. He decided to take a little walk and told her, "Just call him when you have enough time to be alone." When she left, he noticed her hands had grown so many calluses that were not there 4 years ago. And then it finally became clear how much it hurt her to stand aside and watch their fields collapse right before their eyes. He could not come to terms with the fact that these 4 years at the academy were wasted, so he wanted to believe there must be something he could do to fix it. Suddenly an idea flashed in his head. Maybe he should cast aside that spell he learned at the academy. He turned to Vivian and asked if she could lend him part of her power, and without any time delay, she turned back into her true self again. And she said that there was no need to ask about it at all. She was even surprised that he himself really asked Akishi, and she liked it while he was trying to explain that it was not like that and that he just wanted her to give him a little strength. She stated that that was exactly why they needed Quiche, but he immediately reminded her it was not mandatory at all. Those sides that he could see the mother was moving towards them as well, so there was little time left. Yet she quickly planted a kiss on his cheek, and as soon as she did that she merged with him. And he felt an incredible amount of mana surge inside him. When it happened, she asked what he would do with all that mana, since they really could not use green magic to make plants wither, and he simply replied that he already knew that he had tried it several times before. Green mana was the source of life, it was what nourished, but it had no art to take that life from plants. Then again, what Vivian had told him earlier surfaced in his mind. When he used the Living Forest spell, it turned out that he was working not only with green magic but also with black magic. She confirmed this and added that she had never encountered such sorcery either. Since that was the case, he wondered, maybe it made sense to use this spell in a similar way. He tried and started by covering the green magic. He connected the green mana with every plant in the field, even with the vines, which were extremely difficult to remove, and with the tree stumps that had taken root so firmly, as if they were holding onto bones. After that, he had to be extremely precise, otherwise everything would turn into a fire. He covered the green mana with red mana and mixing them together. He released flames, and a gust of wind, flames never seen before. It quietly burned through the field, scorching everything around, and at that very moment he remembered the vow he had given to Ferris. With this mixed magic, he was able to completely cleanse the entire field. And again the field was ready for cultivation. His mother smelled the scent of burnt grass somewhere very close, and she wondered where he had come from, so she turned to Ryudo to ask, but as soon as she arrived, she was overwhelmed with shock because she saw that the entire field had been thoroughly cleaned, and then asked him if it was his magic. He nodded yes, it really was his magic, and that he had learned it at the academy. And his mother, unable to believe what she saw, burst out with emotions. She wondered if she could work in this field again like back when his father was there. He just smiled and assured her that everything would work out as it should. Now, as soon as he returned home, he could work with her, because his father had taught him a lot about farming in his time. Moreover, he also made an important promise to someone in the royal capital. To accomplish this, he had to do this. His mother was extremely happy and awaited it, but first she really wanted to know what kind of promise he was talking about. She started teasing him, asking if it was true that he had indeed gotten himself a girlfriend in the royal capital, and he embarrassedly waved it off, saying it was not true at all. And he gave only a simple oath when suddenly Vivi heard someone approaching him. And she immediately went on the defensive, wondering who it could be. It was Mia, too excited to hide her joy. The rumors turned out to be true, and he really had returned. But as soon as she ran to him, she barely stumbled over a stone and fell face down, right above Vivi. Vivi was literally suffocating and kept trying to break free from there. Mia caught her and apologized for hurting her. Ryudov quietly snorted because her fall vividly brought back old memories. She also laughed and finally gladly accepted him back home. He asked if she was okay, and she got up and said she was fine. She was simply incredibly happy to see him again after such a long separation. He was also impressed by how much he had grown in just 4 years. Then she took his hand and said that she had been eagerly waiting for his return, and now that he was finally here, she wanted to throw him a grand welcome party. She excitedly asked what he wanted to eat. He was a bit confused when he saw how close she was getting, and replied that it was her if she was cooking for him. Then he would still be alive if only he could try her stew once more. He admitted that he had long carried that stew in his thoughts and that every time it brought back warm, good memories. She was incredibly pleased to hear him say that, and she promised to make the best stew for him using all her skills. So she said goodbye and asked them to come later to the usual square because she was going to call everyone there. As soon as she left, his mother started teasing again and said that he really was a child without any charm. While he thought to himself that his mother was really right about her, Vivian turned into a very beautiful woman, that's how it was. And he didn't like how he was looking at her, so in despair, Vivian bit him on the shoulder. Later, he took Vivian to a remote place, and as soon as they were alone, she returned to her original form. And she immediately questioned him what the hell he was doing, and why he was falling asleep because of a passing girl from the village. He also explained to her that it was not like that at all. He and Mia were just childhood friends. And he was a little nervous because he hadn't seen her for so long, and now she looked completely different. At that moment he noticed she still wasn't taking off the cat ears, so he asked why she was still wearing them. She smiled and replied that although it was her first attempt to be a cat, she had already come to understand. These ears were incredibly comfortable, and now she decided that they also looked cute. He laughed and agreed, they really suited her very well. When they found out that she had become even happier, he hugged her tightly. She lived and breathed his praise. Returning to what was truly important, she suddenly felt how the conversation opened doors to what mattered more than ever. When they both stood before a giant tree, she asked why he had brought her here and what exactly they were going to act out in Tata Forest. Titus Forest stretched deep into Portus Forest. Even seasoned travelers from Portus village could not reach there. He remembered how in childhood he once asked his mother why no one could enter Tata Forest. And she told them a story about a huge shield that stood in the square of the village. Once upon a time, there was a legendary adventure team, Brave Ones. Together they accomplished many feats. They defeated a mighty dragon that threatened the kingdom. He came across several ancient ruins that were only mentioned in myths. He established a system of magic, developed new medicines one after another, and even partially deciphered the principles of hybrid magic. About 20 years ago, that adventure party came to the village of Porti. They were searching for powerful magical beasts and unknown materials, and challenging the unexplored land of the demon kingdom, the jungles of Tades. They ventured there. Everyone in the village was sure this traveling company would overcome the jungle without any problems. But only a few moments passed and they realized they were actually returning back. People asked if they had forgotten something, but shock overwhelmed them instantly. The entire group of adventurers was badly beaten, and their leader begged the people to come to help. It turned out that even the strongest party could not break through the walls of the sea of trees, and they were practically destroyed moment by moment. Only the party leader survived. And soon he also left the ranks of travelers out of fear that would overwhelm him in the sea of trees. The shield of the fierce warrior, although it was destroyed then, was still displayed in the village square as a warning. No one is allowed to enter Tades jungle. It was a sign to make it clear to everyone, step into that forest and lose your life. Turning to the present, Vivian called it all a terrible story. The forest is just replaying movements. And Raito added that this is almost inevitable. The influence of manate whirlpool of Mount Tatas was too strong there. Even he failed to control the mana. The metal equipment proved completely useless. Moreover, in that forest, people usually stop understanding who they are inside. Moreover, there lived fiercely dangerous beasts there that could easily crush even the mighty, and yet most of them were still asleep in hibernation. And the reason why he could move freely without any problems in this magical world was the blessing of the green goddess, Didion. His main goal when he entered this forest was to gather strange fruits not found outside, so without wasting time, he asked her if she still remembered that big red heart-shaped fruit they once ate together. Of course, she remembered what he was talking about and what that fruit was called, tamata. It was so delicious that just the thought of it made her salivate again. And it was enough just to taste it. A person felt a surge of strength that could even drive the cold away. Rudio added, the fruit not only adds energy but also fills the body with mana to the very bottom. He believed if he grew tomatoes in his father's field, they could support the magical army. At that very moment, he came across something and she asked if it was Tamat. But still, the dawn of the cave bear came, and for some reason he looked too excited, which confused her even more. The reason for his such elation was simple. Tomath seedlings were growing there, so she asked if he was in his right mind. Since this was already done, he clarified and explained to her he was not going to eat shit directly. Then he asked if she remembered that those rock bears actually lived on mitfruits and that the two of them were beaten again and again. She replied irritably that she remembered and it was terrible. He said that the seeds left in the rick bear's poop actually sprout as soon as spring comes, but she still felt disgusted by it and asked him not to treat it so carelessly. She suggested to them simply to go and look for ripe fruits. But he explained the fruits they are looking for are all big and heavy, and even if he carries a large bamboo basket, they will still only be able to bring back a little. So his plan was simple: to extract the seeds, sprout them, and cultivate them so that they could have as many as they wanted whenever they wanted. She nodded. The plan was indeed good. And she also made it clear that she would not approach wild animals, and went for a walk. He began collecting seeds and immediately thought, this is a great opportunity to gather more because the rock bear was currently hibernating. As his father had taught him, he took a special tray to avoid cutting the roots on the ground and acted as carefully as possible. When Vivian began to shout her name, he told her that there would be silence for a moment now. She needed to focus on this task. Otherwise, the seed would crack. Suddenly, she grabbed his hand and pushed him off the road while he felt a fierce clawed shadow hanging near his head. They crouched down to the ground and She quickly asked if he was okay, and he thanked her for saving his life. The monster that attacked them was a rock bear. Judging by its aggression, they decided that it had just woken up from hibernation. He couldn't believe how early it had woken up this year and realized this was the worst-case scenario. Although these beasts are usually silent, they will fiercely fight for survival to the last. The fur on their body was hard as stone, hence the name, and their claws could crush a rock with incredible force in one strike. With one swipe of its claws, it struck, and even the shield, considered the pinnacle of warrior equipment, was left beyond repair. The monster before them was the guardian of the Yew Forest, the Ashen Bear Beast. The stone bear was a well-known magical creature living in the Porta Forest, and as its name suggests, its fur was as hard as stone, its most distinctive feature. Although it was large and frightening just by its appearance, it mostly fed on plants and generally avoided conflicts. But the stone bears from the Taddy's jungle mutated under the unique magical power of these places. Their bodies grew several times larger compared to ordinary stone bears found outside these jungles, and since then they were called the guardians of the Taddy's jungle. At that moment, the beast was about to pounce on them. Ryudo called Vivienne and said, this is their chance to break free. But she was instead simply focused on giving him a kiss so they could merge in time. He quickly pushed her and saved her before the rock bear could pounce. He unleashed a powerful strike on them right on target. He apologized to her, but at the same time reminded her that they were in serious trouble. But there was no time left for all this. She got up again and shouted that they needed to perform the ritual, but he cut her off a second time. No time. This made her twist with anger. But despite everything, she missed the ritual and agreed to merge with him, giving him her power. Sitting in the back seat, she still shouted at him that he had no emotions at all, and he briefly replied that he heard that very often. But as soon as this was said, a whole monster jumped out in front of them as an angry beast. They had to deal with it. In the heat of the moment, using green magic, he created a shield to block her next attack. And as soon as he realized everything, he immediately understood. It seemed he had made a mistake. The strong claws of the stone bear could easily tear apart the special class shield of the brave warrior. And it had a homemade shield like his. He had already discarded both the spell and the technique. He immediately realized he wouldn't even have a chance. But it was already too late. The rotten beast crashed with all its might while he did not stop and kept pushing further. The beast's strength was off the charts, and Ryudo had not the slightest idea what to do or how to get out of this. But despite this, he remained calm and decided first to strengthen his body, and to pour all the mana he had into the shield. Having done this, he was able to push aside the huge boulder. Rock bear, and it immediately fell back to the ground. Ryudo himself was stunned. He saw that his wooden shield was unharmed, and moreover he could not even comprehend how he managed to repel Rock Bear's attack in the tree sea. But soon he immediately understood what was happening and felt. The amount of mana he was receiving here was by no means comparable to what it was when he merged with the green goddess outside the Sea of Trees. Meanwhile, Vivian asked him why he was acting so confused, and reminded them, back when they were little, they often stole her mana to play with monsters in the Sea of Trees. As soon as she said this, he finally remembered. Vivian was indeed right. In the jungles of Taddy's, not only everything related to monsters and plants was affected, there was also the unknown Linda of mana itself, how much of it could fit into his mana vessel. He remembered how once the two of them together started those games. And then he just ran away, but while he was lost in his own thoughts, Rock Bear was rushing straight at him to attack. Yet he managed to move aside in time, and the beast, having gained speed, crashed headfirst into a tree. He casually ended up behind and was simply catching the same feeling of thick nana, which incessantly rushed through his entire body. He came there not for trifles to gather and at the same time take a couple for himself. He was not going to return empty-handed. When the rock bear blocked his path, he immediately understood. Only one option remained. And that option was only to find him. He crafted a giant sword with the help of green magic and with one swing of this sword. With it, he cut through the rock and the bear immediately completely in half, after which he laid it down with one shot. When the monster lay dead before him, he promised he would never let his precious life be wasted. And along with this, he paid her due respect. Ian also noted, during the hunt he was ruthlessly cruel, quite unlike how he behaved near the moon walls. He replied that even then the situation was completely different, so there was no need to kill the moon wolf, who was also called the guardian of the ecosystem. He realized, although it was a bit selfish, hunting was actually necessary for people to survive in this world. Like this rock bear, its fur becomes softer when its essence is drained. Likewise, it can be very useful in the harsh winter time in the village of Porta. Moreover, the gallbladder was suitable for making high-quality medicine, and claws and fangs could even be used to make shafts and magical instruments. First of all, its meat was packed with nutrients and simply incredibly tasty. And so, in a few minutes, he tore the entire stone bear into pieces, but now another question arose: how to carry it all back to the village. He looked at Vivian as if to say maybe she would agree and help, but she sharply refused. Hard work did not appeal to her. Then he offered her to carry tomato seeds, and even that turned out not to be something she wanted to even touch. He figured out what to do next, and at that moment an idea came to him. Meanwhile, at home, his mother was waiting for him to return. And he was already starting to worry because he had been gone since early morning. But just then he finally came back, and with him he brought a huge sack, which made her curse, and she immediately started asking what was inside. He opened the package and showed her everything he managed to gather, and it simply overwhelmed her. Even though he had always brought some unexpected loot before, this time it was much bigger than ever. It turned out that he took leaves from the forest. They had sterilizing properties, and because of this grew to gigantic sizes, and he used them as wrapping. Then he reinforced the vines and applied his usual rope skills to tightly bind and tie everything. In addition, he strengthened the body with green mana, and after all this, he dragged the giant stone bear on himself. Although images of magic flashed incessantly in his mind, he was able to perform all these strange spells only thanks to the mana from Vivian and the forest. And for this, he thanked her, and she replied that it was all true and that, having merged with him, she now clearly felt it too. 4 years ago, he couldn't even take on this mana, but over these 4 years, his vessel with mana and mana engine grew to incredible sizes. Eventually, all this became a direct result of his lonely, persistent work. His mother also praised him for such quality meat, and since there was so much of it, she decided to give it all away to everyone in the village and organize a rock bear festival. She also told him not to rush and to rest a bit, because after the fight with this creature, he was probably very tired. But he was not tired at all, on the contrary. He wanted to plant all these new seeds he had gathered in the forest into the fields before they withered. His mother reminded him, motivation is good, but you can't push yourself too hard, otherwise you won't endure. He assured her there was nothing to worry about. In fact, he had already trained his body at the academy. At the same time, Vivian agreed with his mother and advised him to rest from mana chore. He appreciated that she cared about him as sincerely as she did. But in reality, he did not feel fatigue. His body still held some extra mana reserves obtained from the forest. Besides, he intended to show his mother his father's field was still as fertile as before, and to deliver the harvested crops to the royal capital as soon as possible. So he could not wait, and if his calculations were correct, this summer many tomatoes would indeed bear fruit. Later, he got to work in his father's field. Vivian felt planting seeds was an incredibly interesting activity, so she waited until he planted the rest. And suddenly he stopped and froze, as if pondering something. She asked what had happened and if nothing was missing so far. He replied that he had imagined how the tomatoes would grow and was thinking about how much space to leave between each plant. He remembered that his father always especially emphasized this moment. The distance between plants is of colossal importance because when the planting is too dense, the crops start to fight with each other. Their roots only had one thing so far: to fight for territory. And when that happened, the harvest did not grow large and began to get sick. Little Rito moved forward and decided to plant them much farther apart so that the harvest would remain happy and not fight with each other. But then his father quickly stopped him and said that if he If he did that, the amount of harvest they could gather would be smaller, and the vegetables would feel lonely. The memories in his head flashed with a smile, and he continued working in the field, relying on everything his father had taught him. After some time, he finally finished with this and completed planting everything down to the last bush. Vidian was a little surprised. Would it really be like this going forward if there was still plenty of field left? And he replied that he had brought only a full basket, but obviously, that would not be enough for such a vast field as this. Since it really sounded convincing, she asked how much time it would take for the field to be filled with tomatoes. And he explained to her, if you continue planting seeds in early spring and start harvesting in summer, then you can extract seeds from there and the quantity for the next year will sharply increase. But that was not what she wanted to hear after all. She could not wait a whole year. Rudo admitted, in fact, he also felt this pressure. Now gates that spawn monsters are opening everywhere, like mushrooms after rain. And at such moments, the exhausted army of the kingdom desperately needed food support, so he could not afford a single second of relaxation. To cope with this, he already had a prepared idea, to quickly and massively grow tomatoes using green magic, but her participation was still indispensable. She was ready to help immediately, yet she asked what exactly he intended to do, because regardless of how much green mana they pumped with green magic, the tomato fruit still could not be harvested right now. With green magic, she could connect plants and nana to make them inflate or stretch, become hard or change their properties. That was all. The explanations did not progress further, and there was no chance she could accelerate their growth. Besides green, there were actually 4 other forces for plant growth. White power, which brings light. Blue magic, which spreads water, and red magic, which gives heat. And black power, which nourishes decay and rebirth. Ryudo explained to her that these were exactly the options he intended to use for this operation. That is why this time he decided to try new composite magic. She asked if he had studied this combination of magic at the Magical Academy as well, and he shook his head. No, he said, that's not true. Composite magic cannot be simply learned by mixing 2 forces. In most cases, people had a high affinity for only one of the 5 types of mana. Because of this, an inclination towards more than 2 types was extremely rare, and those who could really use it were very few. Moreover, the mana balance differed from person to person. For such a person, neither priority nor experience helped. It all came down to creative magic. While he was studying at the academy, he also tried to spot talents unrelated to green magic, but in the end, nothing worthwhile came of it. But over those 4 years, he had almost read all the books in the library, so despite not being able to use any other magic, he kept all the basic magical formulas in memory. For plants to grow, they needed water, light, and nutrients. The soil was already fertile because it had been left fallow, and there was enough water thanks to snowmelt, so all that was left for him now for rapid growth was light. Considering this, he used his magic too. First, he combined young tomato seeds with green mana using green magic. Then he added a bit of basic white magic of life force to that place, and everything happened just as quickly. The crops began to grow at an incredible speed. Because they were all already mature and fully grown. They were both amazed that everything worked to the end, and she even believed there is no chance that even a great deity knew about such a combination of magic. When the tomatoes were fully ripe, she quickly glanced at the cat and, without wasting a second, climbed the tree. She was trembling with impatience to taste those tomatoes. She was struck by how big and beautiful they were. And this was by no means comparable to what she had seen in the jungle. Without wasting time, she turned back into her true self and plunged into work. One more bite of that tomato and when her mind finally shut down from shock. So tasty, and without any pause, she devoured that whole tomato. It seemed to her as if she had found herself in a completely different world, and this took her breath away with happiness. She could completely fill her stomach with just these fruits. Meanwhile, while Ryudo from below called her and asked if the fruits were already well ripened, suddenly he got dizzy and he fell to the ground. She noticed this and asked if he was okay, and he immediately realized he had prematurely forced the growth of the plants, ignoring natural things, seasons, and time. All this put a heavier load on the magical engine than he expected. He realized growing these crops further using only magic would be extremely unrealistic. Vivian also ran up to him and said that she had already warned him. After hunting those stone bears, he needed to rest. He only admitted yes, he overdid it. No matter how deep the bottom of his mana vessel reached, if he delayed too much in using the mana engine that transforms mana. In the end, he remained exhausted by mana, and that is exactly how it happened. Moreover, she warned, if his mana engine completely wears out, he might never be able to create magic again. He only thanked her for the care and assured that he was fine now. And he was simply happy seeing how happy she looked when eating those tomatoes, so he decided it was all worth it. And this left her speechless for a moment. She began to blush and could no longer properly object to him, especially after what he said. And he, as always, had no idea, so he asked what she was whispering to herself. Embarrassed, she replied that it was nothing, and then shoved a tomato into his mouth so he could taste his harvest. Tasting just one piece of that fruit, he was surprised. A stream of mana flowed from it, such power could not be contained. And a question flashed in his mind, could it also be used as a mana potion? But the most important thing was different. He was incredibly happy that his father's overgrown field had finally turned into fertile land. Later, he dreamed a dream childhood memories where bees chased him, a whole swarm, and each was carrying something important. Just as one bee was about to attack him, suddenly, he finally came to his senses and saw that he was lying on his bed. It turned out, after he wasted all his people on bear hunting and tomato growing, he was arrested and he didn't even have time to realize it. Regarding the dream, these were only memories from long ago, which he had actually completely forgotten, and did not understand where that memory suddenly came from. Whatever the reason, he noticed, the sun had already risen, and the cool early morning is a golden time for agriculture. So he quickly changed clothes and rushed downstairs, telling his mother that he would join her to help as well. However, when he went into the kitchen, the vegetables were actually being cut by Mia, not him, not one of the adults, but her. And she wished him good morning. He was surprised that she was here. And he suddenly began to wonder if he had really ended up in Nick's house. While she warned him, beware of what is behind. She quickly wrapped her arms around him, holding him to prevent him from falling backward. The stew was still being prepared, so spilling it on oneself would mean a real disaster. He thanked her for saving him from burns. Then he suddenly realized that she was too close, so he turned away and began looking aside and then said that she had come too close. Vivi was just sitting and doing nothing, but was insanely angry. And she jumped on her to push her away from him. He grabbed Vivi, trying to calm her down, and pushed everything else aside. After that, he asked why she had come to his house so early in the morning. She reminded him that tonight they were throwing a welcome party for him. And he finally remembered, she really had said something like that just after he met her the day before yesterday. As for the stew, she cooked it especially for him after he said that he missed it very much. The fact that she still remembered this embarrassed him a little. And Mother also came in, as always. She began to tease him that by this stage almost the whole village knew he couldn't resist her stew. He didn't even try to argue it was true anyway. When he was little, he tried a new dish every day and Mia always cooked masterfully. Her stew, made from rural ingredients, was the best of all. For him, her stew was the very taste of home. He loved it perfectly and lived by it, but as soon as he smelled it, something seemed a little different. He asked if she had changed the stew recipe, and she was quite surprised. It turned out he had already noticed and understood everything. She remembered that there was one more thing she had actually added, and it was that new plant that he himself had grown. Her mother handed it to her immediately as soon as she stepped into the place. And just like everyone else, as soon as they tasted it, she was overwhelmed with delight how delicious it turned out to be. She was so confident in the taste that she thought, just add this other type of tomatoes and the stew will definitely become deeper in flavor. Although Raito was glad that she liked it, he again made it clear she was getting too close to him. For him, this was not news. Since childhood he had noticed. When she gets excited in conversation, she instinctively moves her body closer, and after 4 years, nothing had changed. At that moment, he suddenly realized, although she looked fully grown, there were still so many things in her that had not changed at all. And then she said she wanted to add some honey from incubator combs to the tomato stew to make the flavor even deeper and tastier. And Ryudo's mother also agreed it was indeed a good idea, but she was not sure if they could get hatch honey at all because it was still too early in spring. Then Mia said that Ryudo should know where to get honey from the heights this season. She recalled once when they were children on a snowy day, he brought her honey from the hives and she asked directly, could he really have forgotten that winter when she was terribly ill and moreover lost her voice? He finally realized what she meant. The dream he had just seen in the morning was not just a dream, it concerned that day. Once when they were still little, she was so sick that she could no longer even speak. Her father was worried sick and prayed that they at least had a supply of hive honey, then they could save her. During the long winter in Portis village, beekeeping was generally not practiced, and honey from the hives was obtained only occasionally as a trade commodity. For them, it was a real luxury. He seemed lucky during the hunt he came across a hive, but because of such thick snow outside it immediately became clear, getting the honey would be extremely difficult. Rita also felt very unwell and could not force herself to look at how uncomfortable she was. His father assured him there was nothing to worry about, she would soon get better, and he added he was sure she was probably glad when she saw him visit her. But then late that night her condition not only worsened, it kept deteriorating relentlessly. She wanted to swallow water but could not even call for mom and dad. She could not make a sound and began to wonder what would happen to her if her throat never healed. This meant that she would never be able to speak with Rudo, and the very thought of it weakened her, making her tremble with fear. She did not want it to happen at all, but at that moment she heard his voice outside her room door. He ran at full speed, carrying honey in his hands, the very same that was needed for her recovery, and this completely threw her off balance. The honey was from the hatch and she could not believe that he had managed to get it, although her father insisted. In winter it is inaccessible. And he, on the other hand, was covered in mud and wounds, yet still simply smiled. From his wounds she understood everything. Despite the drunken snow, he himself found the honey hatch, and this gesture moved her incredibly. She drank the honey from his palms and right now felt a scratch in her throat, and how that scratch melted away, disappeared. Finally, she was able to speak again and thanked him for everything. So, returning to the present, Mia said that from the very beginning he had created special moments for her. And that is why she wanted to prepare the best stew for his welcome party. She wanted to celebrate his return deliciously so that he and everyone else would be at the same table. And turning back to his affairs, he still agreed to go and find that honey she needed, and she truly appreciated it very much. You remembered, in the jungles of Taddies there was a place where flowers bloomed all year round. Since that place was affected by Man of Whirlpool, the very concept of season was crossed out there. But in this zone, giant honey hatches can collect honey all year round, and he remembered, the last time he tried to get even a little of that honey, he almost died. The reason he was still here again was all thanks to Vivian. So he turned to Vivi, asking if she was ready to accompany him to that place once more. Although she was still a bit angry with him, she still agreed. After that, he asked his mother what she planned to do with the household today, and heard in response, there was nothing to worry about. She had already been managing everything herself for a very long time and did not expect anything from him after all, he had just returned. So he did not need to worry about all that. She said that the best stew, which everyone constantly talks about, was actually already waiting for her. And Mia assured her, just trust her. So she urged him to hurry and get that mead, otherwise the party would have ended before he returned. He, of course, was glad that the two were so happy together, and he himself already understood they would manage and take care of themselves even without him. He went outside together with Vivi and promised them that he would definitely find the honey they needed. The sacred mountain tatas was considered the main source of mana in this world, and the forest tatas, which spread from the highest peak, was completely different from the outside world due to the very strong mana whirlpool. Rudo and Vivian finally got there, and as always the flower field looked incredibly beautiful. And he also added that, although a lot of time had passed, it still impressed just as before. But Vivian warned him to stay alert because there were also plenty of dangerous insects there, and he admitted he himself had already been close to death. During the same period again and again, because of those same insects, winter had just passed, and the outside world was already mostly sweaty, withered flowers. That is why for many living creatures, such a blooming flower meadow as here was nothing other than paradise and their last hope. Those insects and birds that flew here were light, but not only for fighting. Each had their unique skills. One, for example, skillfully set prey on fire. They all competed for the limited resources of this flower glade to survive and preserve their species. Despite everything, Vivian still could not believe he was risking danger just because a village blackmailer asked him for a favor, and she was sure he was already hooked. He explained to her that it was not like that at all. His mother and Nia relied on him in this task. And he also really wanted her to taste the best stew that Mia cooks so that later she would be sure she would simply love it incredibly. Seeing how worried she was, he convinced her that was enough, and she no longer argued. Suddenly he noticed a honey hatch nearby. Just looked more closely and it became clear he was entangled in a giant spider web. And the spider itself was just hunting a bee. He quickly used his green magic, saving the bee from the spider's claws, and then released it to freedom. Meanwhile, he and Vivian hid behind a tree he knew. Even saving her life would cause trouble if the bees noticed them. To avoid losing their way, he marked the area with green magic and followed the trail. Vivian asked if he had any idea where exactly the hatch mana from the honey was, and at first told her simply to lower her voice, explaining, "The hatch in the noisy flower field is extremely sensitive." But his head was already swimming, and he had no idea whether the reason was that the web was sticking to his body. However, he did not stop. He held on to the bee and finally came across the honey entrance to the nest. He was delighted they found it so easily. Then Vivian broke off mid-sentence and asked why he wanted so much to go there. As she advised they should look for another nest, puzzled, he immediately asked her, why? And she answered simply she felt that everything would go wrong with this. He understood her anxiety, but at the same time reminded her the sun would set soon, so they needed to return now to find another honey hatch. It would have been too difficult. He moved forward to scout the place and began climbing the tree while she continuously tried to stop him. But he was already gone. Running almost to the nest, he activated the night vision of his magic to look inside and see what was there. What he saw inside drained his spirit, a huge apiary full of hundreds of bees. He couldn't even believe that such a huge hatchery existed in the sea of trees until Vivian caught up with him and shouted that he was constantly bursting in everywhere, not even managing to think. She reminded him again, "You cannot lose vigilance for a moment." He, confessing guiltily that his adventurous spirit was taking over again, apologized to her. Besides, he felt an incredible tension there, exactly the kind she had spoken about earlier. Vivian explained, "At this time of year, all insects and animals are on edge due to the competition for survival." Hearing this, Ryudo pondered. The existence of the forest goddess was probably taken for granted even in the Tata jungle, that creature everyone feared. However, just as it happened with Rock Bear, if they knew their life or the survival of their clan was at risk, without any hesitation they would revert to wild instincts. He would attack everything and everyone who crossed his path, and if the entire colony became hostile to all honey hatches, he surely knew both fighting and fleeing would be extremely difficult. Vivian assured him there was no need to worry. She would always be nearby, and he truly appreciated that. After that, he noticed the bee they had been watching all along, and just as it tried to enter its hive, something happened to it and it began to fall. Ryudo tried to save it, but Vivian stopped him. She remembered what she had just said. However, he ignored the warning and rushed forward to save the bee from dying during the fall. Now their cover was completely blown, and Vivian could not believe what he had just done. Instead, he just snorted and apologized, saying his legs moved on their own. The bees immediately surrounded them both, for there was no other way out left. He was already about to break through the ring, but at that very moment, a woman emerged from the shadows and ordered the bees to stop right there. They all lined up before her, preparing to greet her, and she immediately declared that these two were her most important guests. She recognized Vivian and was stunned by the surprise to see her there after so many years. That is why she was not very eager to enter this nest. She knew who was sitting here. And only then did she finally explain to Ryudo who the woman before them was, the queen of this entire colony. Ryudo froze in shock. He had no idea that the queen could be a human. Seeing that the forest goddess still remembered her, the queen even shone, although she herself was only the queen of a small forest nest, no less numerous than the stars. But Vivian warned Ryudo not to trust her appearance and demeanor, saying that in reality it was just a magical spell she cast to change her appearance. This surprised him even more. The queen also knew such magic, and Vivian added that an ordinary queen was not capable of this. But since Melisandre was different, she succeeded. However, the queen interrupted exactly when she was about to reveal her age to him. In a slightly irritated tone, the queen said, "It is not worth revealing so easily how many years they have behind them with the human man," because she thought it would be a bit too exciting. Vivian laughed and apologized to her, sincerely agreeing, yes, she is really right. Then the queen explained, the reason for their rudeness is simple. At this time of year, food supplies run out, so the children were especially on edge. But despite everything, she was genuinely surprised that a person like Video had come here, and she herself, so she asked why they had come. Both nervously raised the question together, could the queen simply share some honey from the hive with them? For a moment she froze silently, and from beneath the threatening smile, nothing revealed what was happening in her head. She wondered why they were interested in her lifeline at all. She told them that her children risked their lives gathering that honeyed loot from the dreadful place they knew as Field of Death. And then the bees began to surround them again from all sides. She advised them both to reconsider everything once more, because this was not something to laugh about. So Ryudo apologized to her and decided, it is better to leave it as it is and return back to the village. Confused, Vidian asked if everything would really be fine with him. In response, he only smiled and said, although he thought he would do everything to get that mead after hearing about Salen's feelings, he did not want to act selfishly and take it from her by force. Then a bee flew up to her and whispered something in her ear, something that really caught her attention. It was the same bee he had already saved earlier. She informed her that he really rushed into battle, disregarding his own safety, thus saving her life. She added that he could easily get the honey if he just threw out a single beetle. And he agreed, yes, it would indeed be different, but of course, he did not want to do something like that. Vidian added that this is exactly the kind of man he really is, which is why she did not want to leave him alone for a step. But as soon as she heard this, the queen's eyes flared up. She instantly saw how kind they both were. With their abilities, they could easily destroy the whole nest and take the honey if only they wanted to. Ryudo told her that he did not intend to treat them harshly, and after everything she had just heard, she declared if they can show proper compensation, then she would not treat them lightly either. Vidian felt that there was something too suspicious here, so she asked what exactly the queen was aiming for with this conversation. While Ryudo was pondering the etiquette he was taught at Magic Academy, and considering what exactly he should do if addressed by a noblewoman, the queen announced she would gladly give them her honey, but only on the condition that in return they give something as a sign that would prove their bond is becoming stronger. He reached out his hand in advance, touched her, and bowing, paid proper respect. This gesture stunned her to the edge, and Vivian also could not believe what she had just seen. So how did she manage to build such a large nest in this forest and earn the trust of all her companions? He claimed that Murazandi was undoubtedly the best ruler he had ever seen. Irritated, Vidian asked what the hell he was trying to do there, and he replied, nothing special, just a formal gesture of respect to a noble lady. But she didn't care about his explanations. She was madly angry because he had never done this for her. She reminded him that she herself was a goddess, so that was much nobler than any queen, and he, in turn, was only trying to calm her down. Meanwhile, the queen began to blush after what he had just done to her, and butterflies fluttered in her stomach. But she gathered her thoughts and told herself that she was a proud queen hatched from an egg. Only this was her first time she had ever tasted quiche on the back of her hand. And it really pleased her. Vivian noticed how she was blushing and ordered her to just stop blushing already, and Ryudo was only wondering if they would manage to turn the conversation back to their barter. Later, all three sat together and truly discussed their business, and Ryudo still did not quite understand what exactly they could offer her in return worthy of that precious honeyed sweetness. The queen assured them that they did not need to be so formal with her, because the only thing her soldiers ever brought back was pollen or flower nectar. Everything from the outside world was a rarity and a treasure for her. For example, she pointed her finger at the video with the earring. Was wearing was also a very lively thing, and that would have been enough for her. For her, Ryudo remembered, it was the same gift he once gave her back in childhood, and he was filled with surprise when he saw that she still wore it despite so many years. Suddenly, Vivian shouted and released an incredible amount of magical power. The whole hall trembled. Everyone who was in that room was completely stunned. And she made it very clear that she would not give up that earring under any circumstances. The queen simply apologized to her, and seeing how she so freely released both feelings and power, and all because of some earring, Hesh understood. For her, it was probably a truly precious treasure. Vidian finally calmed down and, looking her straight in the eyes, asked Melisande if she was really trying to test her. To tease Vidian even more, the queen began to behave like a servant and clung to Ryudo, mumbling that the green goddess's looks were very scary and that she, which made Vidian even angrier. She shouted for her to stay away from him. Putting that question aside, the queen could feel that he had quite mysterious mana. And from this, her curiosity only flared even more, while he, on the contrary, felt as if something invisible was crawling all over his body. He had absolutely no idea what it meant. It was then that she laid everything out clearly and explained. The reason why Vidian was so attached to this earring goes back to childhood, once he picked it up from the bottom of an inner lake in the forest. And he also found the best craftsman in the village and remade the find into earrings as a gift. While she was saying all this, Ryudo was completely shocked. He asked how the hell she could know about such a thing if he hadn't told her anything. She simply replied, "The flow of mana is the convergence of thoughts." Then she placed her hand on his heart and declared that the ease with which she managed to manipulate his mana engine proved that his mana control was still immature, but if he wanted, she was ready to give him special instructions. At that very moment, Vivian interrupted them and ordered her to stop bothering him already. So Melisande thought for a moment and asked Rito, wouldn't he be interested in exchanging that beautiful disc he had with him, already filled with magic, for honey. He took out the pocket watch issued to him. At the academy, he asked her if this was exactly what she had been talking about. She was completely amazed at what a refined metalworking marvel that watch was, and also the material in it, high-quality mithril. Just a glance and she felt it boasted the highest level of craftsmanship and was filled with delicate magic. She was utterly enchanted, she couldn't even look away, and she firmly believed that this would be a perfect exchange. Vivian inquired if that watch meant something to him since he always carried it with him. He replied that it was more of a habit to keep it in his pocket. And in rural work, a clock wouldn't be particularly necessary, and he didn't feel any special attachment to the supplies from Magic Academy at all. So he did not object and allowed it. In that case, the deal was made. As she promised, Vivian offered them the best honey she had. And both were amazed when they saw how that honey looked too pure. But then the queen voiced another demand and Vivian questioned her while she tried to use Rito just because he was kind. And she explained to them everything was not at all as they thought, and in fact, she wanted to entrust him with one of the royal cells of this hive. A royal cell is essentially a chamber from which the next queen of the bee swarm emerges. There are usually several queen cells in a hive, but after all this struggle, only one had the chance to become queen. It was truly a tragic event. Even when they finally managed to be born, they immediately had to fight their sisters to the death. However, she was sure if Ryudo could successfully raise them, then he would be able to collect honey anytime. And this, in turn, would give him a chance to get everything he so desired. Listening to this, he couldn't help but think to himself, the village of Portos always faced long and bitterly cold winters, so beekeeping was considered hopeless. But if it was about a new species from the sea forest, he thought, then maybe it would survive the harsh frosts. Moreover, it was said that hatch honey is full of nutrients and has powerful antibacterial properties, and he also heard that it is used as a universal ingredient for magical potions. And if he could get it, he was sure the limits of support he could provide to the army at the front line would expand just as surely. Melisande also had reasons to trust. She could entrust him with her dearest daughter because he saved one of her children without even stopping, disregarding his own safety. And she also said that it happened for the first time someone had ever praised her nest at all. For this, she was truly grateful to him. But as always, Vivian caught a pause and immediately interrupted her, and she said to Ryudo, "Since we have gotten everything we need, it's time to return home because the sun is already setting." He wanted to stay a little longer because he hadn't finished talking with the princess, but she didn't care. She insisted that they leave. Then the queen summoned him and informed, Vivian had always been solitary and above all extremely serious. She was afraid that her own intervention could disrupt the entire balance of the forest, so she remained silent, only watching them and keeping nearby from afar. But Melisande was already beginning to feel maybe they were keeping too much distance. It had already been 10 years since Vivian began to change, and even the mood of this forest, which was once too gloomy, became much brighter. And she was sure this shift happened only because of Ryudo's presence. He had no idea what she meant, and she herself did not dig deeper. She and the children simply bowed to him, and she thanked sincerely, hoping that he would continue to cherish his attachment to Vivian. He assured her that neither years nor circumstances would change that, and promised to raise her child properly. From these words, she felt so joyful, as if her heart blossomed. Eventually, these two finally flew out of the nest, and later got back to his home. He handed the honey to Mia, and she was quite surprised. Could it be that he really managed to get it? So she was ready to cook the tastiest broth and immediately assured him she would keep the rest for herself. Meanwhile, his mother nudged him, let him go to the square ahead and just show everyone his face because many of his friends were also impatiently waiting for his return. He nodded maybe so. In his head, he still couldn't get rid of the anxiety. After the failure and expulsion from Magic Academy, he didn't dare to look people in the eye and was sure they would all be incredibly disappointed in him. He couldn't avoid this, so he headed to the square where everyone had already gathered to welcome him back. At his home, meanwhile, they arranged a whole bunch of decorations for the return, and he was completely stunned. It seemed they were preparing a festival, too lavish even for a regular farewell party. Suddenly, a man approached him with a mug of beer in hand and smiled, saying he was terribly glad that Ryudo had returned because he had been drinking since the evening. It was his best friend Hans. Ryudo was also incredibly happy to see him after so long, but then something went wrong with Hans. The alcohol finally made itself known, and he started vomiting while Ryudo tried to hold him and gently lower him down. Hans felt a bit ashamed. He already understood himself that in such a state, although he wanted to show Ryudo a new vegetable crop he had grown. As soon as he heard this, his hands rose back as if nothing had happened, and he switched to his merchant mode without pause. He demanded more information about this new vegetable. He didn't care what condition it was in. He didn't miss any business opportunity and wanted to taste it right now. Ryudo showed him the tomato he had grown, and Hans also admitted, even after crossing the entire continent, he had never seen such a fruit. Without wasting a moment, he took a sip. And he was completely stunned when he tasted it how delicious it was. The flavor and texture were simply perfect. But suddenly he had a feeling, and this surprised him even more. The nausea from excessive drinking suddenly disappeared, and Ryudo himself found it hard to believe. He was sure that even if tomatoes contained a lot of mana, this was too far-fetched. But Hans was not lying. He said that his headache and that disgusting sensation in his chest really went away. He was so overwhelmed with delight that he wrote that the effects of this fruit were like the medicine Mary prepares. Then Mary herself approached him and declared, even if Ryudo had found a new vegetable himself, there was no way the vegetable could have the same effects as the medicine. After that, she nodded to Ryudo and said with a glow in her voice that she was incredibly pleased to see him home again. He greeted her in response and noted that her skill in mixing medicines was known even in the royal capital. Moreover, he thought that a nickname like Demon Star of the Frontier sounded simply incredibly cool, and she blushed when she tried to explain that it was just an exaggerated title. He just smiled and assured her there is nothing to be ashamed of. Moreover, once at the academy, they talked about her too much, considering this. He told her that he brought a souvenir and that, in his opinion, it might help with her medicines, but she immediately guessed. Another strange thing again. That was exactly it, as soon as he showed her the monster's organ. And she was suddenly stunned because she had no idea what it was. He told her it was a stone with a bear's gallbladder and that he was almost certain she already knew about it. She guessed it perfectly. And she remembered the gallbladder rock, the dwelling stone, created from the material of thousands of universal tonics. The organ before her, despite looking similar, had completely different dimensions, volume of mana, and even quality. This really caught her attention. Her geek awakened inside, and she believed that with such people she could even create a legendary panacea, while Ryudo was simply glad that she liked it. Hans also boasted that he always managed to surprise everyone, and in response he simply threw out, "This means only one thing: he hadn't taken a single step while their achievements shone so brightly." Hans was a sharp-eyed merchant. He traveled the world, delivered goods to villages, and spread his culture there. While Mary was a world-famous brilliant witch of the royal capital, many called her the outer demonic star. Compared to them, he felt like just an undercooked loser runaway who was expelled from the academy, and watching everyone give him such a grand reception, he couldn't help but feel guilty. But Mary and Hans stopped him right there and shouted that it was absolutely not true. Two of them knew him better than he could imagine himself, so they were half-dead certain. Those idiots in the royal capital simply didn't see how truly amazing he was. He just said, and then Uncle Liberio approached him, patted him on the head and said, "Don't think about the feudal, just enjoy this night, drinking." He insisted that they should keep drinking because it was his party, and Boltus ale in the capital he would never be able to get anyway. So everyone raised their glasses and made a toast to finally meet him at home. Ryudo blossomed with joy upon seeing that everyone in the village was still as cheerful and kind as before. It was then that his mother and Nia finally arrived there, bringing a huge cauldron full of her signature fish soup. As soon as they caught that incredible smell of soup, she immediately served everyone the main dish for the night. They could not wait and instantly lost their minds. They asked her to pour them some of it, but they turned out to be so impatient that they already started fighting over it. But just as everything had gone so far, Mia attacked everyone and ordered them to simply stop. She reminded them that they were celebrating Ruto's return, so here he is the guest of honor. Everyone fell silent, and for a moment even they felt fear of her. While Hans was apologizing to her for rushing forward so abruptly, the air seemed to grow heavier again. Then he laid out a clear path for Rudo, and Mia poured him a special broth, the very one she had prepared just for him, and because of this, he truly valued her even more. He was quite impressed to notice that his scent was now even more distinct than before, so he wondered if it was the honey and tomato she had added. Whatever the reason, he took a spoon and ate everything to the end. As soon as he did it, he gasped as if he was carried into a completely different world. He seemed to taste every flavor. The signature village ground wheat grain, healthy goat milk butter, strong and deep like full-bodied wine, and also vegetables and fruits that had become sweeter over the winter. He also silently but unmistakably felt the tomatoes and honey from the hive, and at that moment realization struck. This was the very thing that made this stew exactly Porthos Dillage. He did not say a word and remained silent, composed, as if every bite was an answer. He did not look away from the food while Mia stood behind, confused. And he asked if she liked it. She replied that there was no need to ask, it was incredibly tasty as it was. But he immediately felt the saltiness in the dish was too sharp. She was surprised because she had checked the taste many times and even let him and their mothers try it. But finally she noticed, while he was eating, he was actually crying. And the salt, it was just his tears dripping into the bowl. He was glowing with happiness. So much had happened to him in these 4 years, but he still managed to return home. And everyone had already accepted him. Everyone noticed it and decided to cheer him up. He was called and told that there was no need to bow his head so low. He was and always would be the pride of this village. And they just wanted him to live through this moment and let go of his disappointments. Mia also assured she would definitely become more skilled to make the dishes even tastier. So she asked him to help her with culinary research. He wiped his tears and, revealing a wide smile, promised that he would definitely keep getting better. After that, Hans quickly jumped to Mia and asked her to just pour him some of that stew, since after all he was a friend of Rido. Meanwhile, others were already shouting at him and demanding he wait his turn. Vivi also couldn't wait to taste it, so she tried to eat it straight from the pot. But it was too hot, she burned her tongue and immediately started running around, trying to cool down. While everyone saw this, Rido's friends surrounded him and also wanted to drink together with him. He, seeing how everyone still respected him so much, felt incredible gratitude and sincerely thanked them from the bottom of his heart. Later he and Hans sat together, and he asked how things had been in the royal capital over these few days. He reported that the situation was far from rosy. Gates were opening everywhere. Villages and towns were suffering, and even the royal army was beginning to exhaust itself. And this had become routine. The Magic Academy was sending not only senior cadets to the front line, upperclassmen were going there too, and Rita was increasingly troubled by the question of how Phillies and everyone else were feeling. Without wasting time, he immediately got to the point and told Hans that he actually needed his help to deliver these tomatoes he had grown to the royal capital. His inner entrepreneur woke up again, and he was already ready for a business conversation because he firmly knew his tomato, wherever it was sold, would cause a real wave of admiration. Since his target now was the royal family, Hans recalled, he had heard that their money was currently bursting at the seams. So he decided to turn to the noble estates. Those people were known as vain merchants who were ready to pay any price for a truly rare item. He himself already sensed a good fortune was coming his way. But then Rudolph took everything into consideration and told him, for now, all tomatoes must be sold only at the Magic Academy. This completely threw him off. He asked if he was really serious about that, and in response he heard, everything there is critically tense right now. And most importantly, he reminded him, it was the same place because of which he was expelled. Rudo also nodded in response. Everything he said was indeed true. But Hans then turned the conversation in a completely different direction. He decided that he was trying to uproot the very cause of their hostility. If so, he assured, in such behind-the-scenes maneuvers he was unmatched. And Rudo immediately corrected. He meant something completely different. He explained, if the kingdom's army is destroyed, it will turn into a national crisis. And when that happens, he will no longer be able to continue running his business. That is why he wanted to support the army from the rear together with Tamat. Hans agreed to this as well. And he thought, if they can push through METS to restore mana and destroy these unstable mana pots, then they can truly capture the monopoly on the entire mana market. Yet, since this was only a trial launch, Ryudo aimed to sell them as cheaply as possible at a price that could already be negotiated now. Everyone was so driven by this idea that they had long forgotten common sense, and he declared, with such a product, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for them. Ryudo did not want this and asked at least once to just be heard, and he could not persuade or argue, so Hans agreed as well. Hans assured that both the price and distribution he would keep for himself and promised he would not ignore his wishes. But then, suddenly Marie approached Ryudo, sat on his lap, and he was completely confused. She was undoubtedly drunk. And Marie asked him why he was having a serious conversation with Hans right in the middle of the party. She said how long she had been waiting for him to come home. And he, on the contrary, had no idea how to behave with her in this situation. So he tried to calm her, but Marie only wanted to show him her true power. She took 2 of those new pills she had just made herself, and then drank more wine. But suddenly she sobered up completely, and he drank all the alcohol, and everything fell apart. She became sober and fully came to her senses. She proudly declared that she had already flown far beyond Eni's drinking, and Ryudo was very surprised to see how originally her medicine worked, while Hans, on the contrary, was fired up by her new work and wanted to sell it immediately. She informed him that it was still at the prototype stage and added, "The drug is capable of sobering a person up right on the spot and also restores memories lost due to intoxication, so they can recall every word and every action." However, just then she suddenly remembered what she herself had done with Ryudo only a few minutes ago when she was drunk, and she felt quite embarrassed. She thought to herself that now she would also have to brew a potion that could erase memories. Seeing that her face was still flushed red, the guys decided the medicine did not work properly since it was only a prototype. But that only irritated her more, and she assured that the remedy really works. She even suggested Ryudo check everything himself. And he didn't really want to. Those he had tried several times back at Magic Academy almost always left only bad memories. Especially when he used medicines made by the capitals, none of them had any effect beyond limited. And if they were not used together with white magic to suppress side effects and enhance the effect, they were just pills not even suitable for a normal result. It did not suit his constitution, he always suffered, and as a result only side effects appeared. Moreover, he stated that even the professors did not trust these medicines much. Then he looked at Mary and everything became clear. She was literally burning with rage upon hearing this from his lips. She gave him advice and said that whoever he was, there are things that should not be spoken aloud. After that, she asked him not to mix their potion, which she brews with the master, with cheap fakes, those prepared by witches in the capital. Hans also assured that her potion was of a completely different level, and Mary even blushed. She promised to show him that she could brew an incredible potion that would definitely impress him, and at a low price too. However, returning to the more important matter, she asked him if he could spare her some time. Give her a few more of those giant stairs Galt that you had given her before. She had never seen or even heard of material of such quality, and that was why she believed she could create a true panacea. And let one of her dreams finally come true, but Revo on the other hand had no idea what this panacea she kept talking about was, and was very shocked when she heard about it. She even looked at him a bit condescendingly and asked what exactly he had studied at the Magic Academy if he didn't even know about panacea. He explained that magical pharmacology was a completely different department. Then she explained to him, panacea is not just a name but legendary medicine from ancient Tony, a whole witchmeric formulary. Rumors said they could literally cure anything: poison, bodily injuries, diseases, wondrous disorders caused by monsters, and so on. And if a person was not yet dead, it could instantly remove any symptoms regardless of what caused them. So for her, it was true dream medicine. His recipe contained ingredients that no one had ever seen or even heard of. That was why among witches it was considered nothing but a mirage. She had no idea that Malik's book could hide lies instead. She was sure that this discovery would be the first step toward restoration. Rito simply froze at how straightforward and direct she was, and a thought flashed through his mind. Her curiosity and passion for research actually surpassed even the scholars from the capital. She was ready to pay him any amount, but he then waved it off and said she didn't need to worry about it. And he simply asked how many such parts she needed. She replied, now 3. But at the same time, she could not believe that he would really give it to her for free, although he asked to wait a little while because he would still have to look for it again. This did not bother her at all. She was ready to wait forever. But Merchant Khan said, showing no desire for money is not always good. And since Ryudo did not want to, he was ready to take this role upon himself. but Mary directly ordered him to be silent. She saw that he was already thinking about how to profit from her. Ryudo quickly apologized and explained that he was only joking. And Ryudo also said that, in fact, he had nowhere to spend the money, but he still asked Mary, when she finished cooking, could she share some of that universal medicine with him. Hans began to tease him and asked if he was really trying to secure priority access to her medicine, and the man replied that this was not what he was thinking about at all. His main goal remained unchanged, to do everything in his power to protect the nation and its people from Gate. He already had fertile fields that his father left in the mysterious ecosystem Sea of Tree, and also the rare potential of the villages Porta's Villages 333. He believed, if they could squeeze the maximum out of this, then his plan would definitely work. Now that he had managed to achieve pairing, he already had several more plans ready. However, Maria and Hans did not really believe in all this and stated that his dream was probably too big. Was he really capable of feeding the hunger of the entire continent alone with such achievements just with these lands? He did not condemn them for how they thought, but the essence was one: he believed he could achieve this goal. For now, Vidian was sitting somewhere in the distance and drinking water from the river, and now she felt on her own skin. Cat tongues are weak against the heat. She also got angry at Ryudo because she decided that he had already forgotten about her, although he promised to share that incredible broth with her. And just then he sneaks up behind her and rushes closer, and he saw with relief that she was okay. She didn't even look at him and immediately dismissed the thought that she might believe it. There was no question of her believing such an obvious lie. And he kept apologizing, trying to explain that it was extremely difficult for him to slip away unnoticed among so many people. And just as he promised, he brought her a bowl of stew, the very one he had specially hidden just for her. He even offered to cool it down, as if he remembered, the last time she tried to eat it, her tongue got burned. But as soon as she heard this, she became herself again, habitually clenched the offense, and, opening her mouth, ordered him to feed her. This caught him a bit off guard. While she didn't let go, it was clearly visible on her face how lonely and hungry she had been all this time. He fed her the stew and asked if she liked it. Now she was convinced. Mia's culinary skills were truly incredible. Of course, although she lived by this every day, she still didn't admit it and was feverish that it was precisely thanks to her that they had filled the precious hatch honey, so that was what made the broth so successful. She leaned on his shoulder and asked for another piece, thinking, since she was eating with him, it was okay for him too. It tasted even better. Then the action moved to the capital. There was complete chaos because monsters were attacking her. It was a gigantic bat, and the knights began to exhaust themselves. No matter how many monsters they knocked down, they still did not end, only falling one after another. At that moment, one winged creature grabbed a civilian, and while she begged for help, the knights did not know what to do, because there was a real threat that the civilian would be harmed. While she was tearing the clinging monster away, Feli stepped forward and, using her floating magic, stopped it. She stepped up to the bat, snatched it with her sword, and led the civilian out, successfully saved. Her companion Laura praised her again for such wonderful work, and Feli felt grateful for these words. The knights also remembered Felicia, the one everyone called the genius of the Magic Academy, and even she held the title Apostle of Dawn. They were impressed by how skillfully she handled it, although in reality Felicia was still just a student. But even despite her talent, there was one thing. When a student was sent to the front line along with them, it only emphasized how critical the situation in the capital had become right now. Another student was carrying a wounded soldier, and Laura looked at him and said, if it was only minor treatment, she could help them with her white magic. The student informed her that the matter was extremely serious. The soldier had fallen into a state of mana exhaustion. Mana depletion apparently was an irreversible disorder. Excessive use of magic overloads and breaks the body's mana engine, and the victim remains in chronic mana exhaustion. A group of students whispered among themselves. Even the mana potions began to lose effectiveness, and their taste was disgusting. One of them said that when Ryudo was with them, things were not so bad, but another immediately objected. His green magic was completely useless and he just rode on horseback. And at that moment, Felis stepped closer and declared that the so-called outcast they mock is still out there sweating, working hard to support the royal army. And that is not the name people like them could gossip about. They only whine endlessly. So Felis took her valuables and went on to save the people. In her own thoughts, she also had to honestly admit, there is at least a drop of truth in those boys' words. and she herself was getting more and more exhausted every day, and that meant only one thing: manipulations no longer worked properly. And just think, under such circumstances, they expelled Ryudo, and she simply could not understand what exactly director Alphonse had in mind. By the way, the scene switched to Alphonse's office, and some mysterious man in a hood asked if he would distribute the batch of mana puppies before them, the magical army. And of course, the director was corrupt and claimed that it was a luxurious item intended exclusively for his own use. They say it is a masterpiece known as the Spirit Reviving Elixir. And it turned out that this highest grade of elixir was created by none other than the witch called Demon Star of the Borderlands, Mary. He drank the elixir and the effect appeared immediately, releasing an incredibly large amount of black magic. And yet that old man was not satisfied, so he did everything only as bait. He wanted Felice, the daughter of Sky Knight, to keep fighting on the battlefield as long as possible, just for him. Later, in the middle of the night, one student broke the silence. He rang the emergency alarm bell in the academy, woke everyone up, and announced the threat. Felice was still resting on her bed until her friends Beria and Laura came. He entered her room to wake her up. The swift horses were already waiting outside. But Felice did not move a finger. Not that she did not want to get up, she was just too tired and dreamed of resting a little longer. This fiercely annoyed Laura. She had to drag her outside again, despite everything. Marie, soft as always, offered to help her get dressed while she was still resting. And Laura continued to burst out yelling because Marie always holds Felice too long, even when there is an emergency outside. Laura finally waited until everything was gathered and suggested starting with something simple, clearing the low-level gates to finish them off once and for all, and then properly have fun at the Night Rooster Tavern. As soon as she said this, Felice also flared up. Enough words, time to move. She noticed that right there were 3 mages protecting the nation, and Laura just teased her, saying these are funny remarks from someone who gets drunk and screams at the top of her lungs every day. Felice pressed back that she was by no means better, and Laura surprisingly agreed, saying every day she is sucked into mud and blood and probably she would not endure this without drinking. Meanwhile, Marie looked at the floral ornament in her hair and asked if she would wear it the same way for this mission. Felice looked around a little embarrassed and quietly asked if it really looked strange, or maybe she was just imagining something wrong. Both calmed her down. There is nothing strange here, on the contrary, it suited her very well. She was even told it is not worth losing this valuable thing to him because it is a gift from her beloved dear heart. At those words, she blushed and immediately began to justify herself, saying it is not at all as they thought. The 3 of them rode a horse, and she kept repeating that he was just a classmate about whom she had already told them many times. While this was happening on the outskirts of the capital in the town of Fernata, monsters rushed headlong, and knights with all their might held them off at a distance until the evacuation of the residents was completed. There were too many monsters. They had already begun to slip through the front positions and go deeper and deeper into the city. They tried to hold them off as long as possible, but without magical support, they could not hold out for long, and it was then that Felice and her group arrived on the scene. A moment later, she destroyed several monsters, saving the knights who were about to be killed. And seeing her, they felt confident. Now the tide of this battle would definitely turn. But Felice warned them not to relax and asked where their captain was. The captain of the 8th Knight's gods appeared before her and, without holding back, tore apart the magical academy, saying they did not even suspect with. She reminded him of what he had already explained to them so many times: just let Felice finish her studies early. She is so talented, but still said that she had already explained and wants to remain a student. Mari asked the captain to report to them on the state of this battle. To this, he answered without any detours, all the worst. The gate was low level, but too many monsters came out of it, and the magical army could do nothing, could not hold them back. And if the front were broken through and the lines fell, the strike would also reach the knights, the ones responsible for evacuating the residents. The magical corpse body was already suffering from mana exhaustion, so even holding the ring and hitting the gates was difficult. Even the captain then agreed. When Ruto was supporting them, things went much better. But as soon as he heard the news that the head of the school Alphonse had expelled him from the academy, he could not understand why these idiots resorted to such a thing. Felice meanwhile just felt incredible pride when she heard him say it and praised him for having such a good outlook on things, and he only thought, damn it, why does she have to pretend to be so important? She added that even though Ryuto was no longer with them at the academy, She was sure that he was looking for his own patond, that he could support them in his own style, because that was exactly how it was. She also decided to continue doing everything as best as possible in everything so as not to fall behind him. She relied on Laura. She would support her with magic while she rushed forward, and Laura reminded her not to push herself too hard. She used her white magic of levitation to make so that it floated up into the sky. Feliz informed the captain, complete the ring formation while she was cutting the monsters from the air. But again, Laura reminded her not to push herself. Even her supportive magic was weakening day by day, and Mary also asked her to be careful. Feliz was sincerely grateful to both for everything they had done for her. But she was not going to just stand and do nothing, otherwise she would feel that she had lost her dignity in front of Rudo. So she mixed her red and white magic to weave the most powerful fusion spell, Ultimate Fusion Spell. After that, she grabbed a fire spell and unleashed it on the monsters, covering them with crimson flames and instantly knocking them all to the ground, while she continued launching those fireballs from the air without pausing to breathe. The captain also couldn't resist and was fascinated by how imprecise her magic was, although he had seen it many times before. However, Mary immediately felt that something was wrong. Her magic was usually never this weak. At that very moment, a whole swarm of bats fell on her from behind, and they suddenly attacked. And she was shocked to see how many of them had been hiding this all along. Laura sharply shouted at her and ordered her to just retreat for a while. There were too many of them, and they still hadn't realized what exactly had happened. But the bats were here too, just above them, like a dark curtain hanging in the air. And they rushed to attack Laura and Marie. At that moment, Feliz finally realized it was no longer possible to preserve the magical power. Then she decided on a large-scale offensive and resolved to finish off everyone with one strike. She used her Crimson Beam spell and in an instant cleared all the bats circling around them. She pulled both Mari and Laura out of trouble, but she herself was already on the verge of exhaustion. But despite this, she was not going to give up. She firmly decided to finish off the remaining monsters. Suddenly, her husband was engulfed by a black whirlwind, and the feeling of it struck her like a verdict. She abruptly hung in the air and froze in a paralyzed state. The girls immediately realized this was a symptom of mana exhaustion, but they could do nothing to pull her out because even Laura was already on the edge. The bat remains did not waste a second and pounced on the leftovers, which did not even have time to move. And she began to fall to the ground. Mari mounted the horse and rushed straight forward to the monster to save her. And Captain Gods immediately ordered all forces to protect her, open a breach, and defend Feliz to the death. Falling, she could not believe that of all people it was him. She suffered from exhaustion and in such a hopeless, utterly desperate situation. She wondered if this would really be her end and thought to herself, if Ryudo were still there, the consequences of this battle would be completely different. She just wanted to see him one more time, but knew this was a farewell. And as soon as the flower hairpin in her hair flared up, the light burst out sharply and brightly. Without a doubt, she felt Ryudo's mana flowing through her body, and the black vortex that blocked her mana began to disappear. She couldn't even imagine how much time it took him to make such an exquisite magical tool of this level in the royal capital, where green manner is almost never found. Moreover, he simply gave her this incredibly valuable item, and she was sincerely, truly grateful. The mana reserve was restored, and she immediately began whispering spells while falling onto the monster, when suddenly wings grew on her back. And as soon as that happened, with one precise movement, she slashed the monster with her sword. Mari was shaken by the divine power she displayed, but as soon as the feathers began to fall, they noticed even their wounds were healing, and they couldn't understand where exactly she was drawing such pure mana from. Feliz recalled that pure green mana was the source of everything, and at that very moment felt as if she was no longer the person she once was. She launched a large-scale attack and completely destroyed all the monsters that were there. Their Captain Gods quickly ordered his blue mages to close the gate, and Marie also used her blue magic spade blockade. They closed the gate. The blue magic held on the moisture in the air, and that is why it was now the only technique capable of sealing the gate. The knights reported to the captain that they managed to close the gate, and he immediately ordered them to destroy the remaining monsters to put a final end to it. When the battle subsided, Laura and Marie ran up to Feliz, asking if she was okay, and at the same time clarifying what kind of mana she had just used. Feliz apologized to both for scaring them and said, "That mana all thanks to Rudo." After she explained the floral ornament to them, Laura again couldn't resist teasing her, saying that Rudo was probably incredibly passionate about her. But as soon as they said this, a little girl appeared nearby, crying to her mother and trembling from hunger, saying she was hungry. But the mother had nothing to give her. The monsters had burned all their supplies. So Phyllis approached her and handed her a sandwich she had with her. The little girl nodded and thanked her, but the mother immediately stopped her. She said that this food was meant for mages. But Phyllis assured her that there was no need to worry about such things, and added all this happened because of her own inability, because of which they ended up in such trouble. That is why she only wanted to help them. Then she pondered the gates as if leading to a demonic world. Even when they kill the monsters crawling out of those gates, the creatures simply turn into mana and are sucked back into the gate. Countless refugees who lost their homes due to these repeated invasions headed to the royal capital, and the city immediately faced food shortages and a sharp rise in prices. Moreover, crimes became increasingly brutal, turning the city into a slum. At that moment, she recalled what Ryudo said about agriculture and realized, after all, he was right. After this, she began to guess what he was doing right now. The scene returned again to the village of Porto, and Hans was already heading outside to sell the next batch of fresh goods. He most wanted to see the buyer's reaction as soon as possible. Now there was far too much merchandise for sale, and for the first time in a long while his trading blood truly boiled. Ryudo then remembered, in fact, he was going to ask Mary to go with him as an escort, but she had already immersed herself in the study of panacea. And Hans also added that the whole world is waiting for her new work. Enough, he was disappointedly sure of this. Ryudo must have a bunch of other tricks, and he ordered to share all this with his best friend before anyone else. Ryudo promised to do so, and that was all. Hans again set off and left the village. He glanced at Vivi, and they were both ready to set off into the baby jungle. This time his target was a local jungle creature that could feed everyone to their fill, and her name was Sudu. Later they returned to the Sea of Trees, because Ryudo felt that Sudu grows in the southeastern swamps of Belro, in the Bay of the Sea of Trees. But too much time had passed since he last visited there, so he asked Vivian to guide him, and she, for her part, really wanted to play with him just like before, when they were children. "Since you returned, there's plenty of work there," she said, and asked if he wanted to play hide and seek for the first time in a while. Ryudo was not really sure how to respond. That seemed insufficient to her, and she flared up with anger and began to look at him intently. He tried to brush off the conversation, recalling how she ate sweet potatoes in the fall, and warned, if they don't start growing it soon, they won't manage to do everything on time. But she did not accept this and stubbornly stared at him. Then he added, "Through the gate, fields and roads are breaking down all over the country, and even their own village Portos, closely connected to the capital, is suffering terrible consequences." Vivian was already starting to get wildly angry and couldn't understand why he stubbornly clings to thoughts about the capital. After all, they were expelled from there, and he explained, the friends he made there are all on the front line. She cut him off right there and sharply asked if that acquaintance was a woman. Embarrassed, he blushed and replied that there are many girls at the academy, so it turns out his friend is a girl. But this only angered her more, and she began to think that somewhere in the capital he was seduced by some women. She looked around and no longer wanted to help him search for Suthu, while he tried to stop her and insisted that it was all just a misunderstanding. To cheer her up, he agreed to play hide and seek, and also asked, let her be lenient with him, because hide and seek in the Sea of Trees with the green goddess herself was simply too disadvantageous for him. As soon as she heard this, it was as if she was jerked back into reality, and she decided to find him at any cost. They started playing, and just like that, everything took off. 30 minutes passed, he searched all around. But even after using green magic, he still couldn't find any trace of her presence. Then he called her and admitted his defeat, and at that very moment noticed a ribbon hanging from a tree. And he recognized that ribbon, the very one Vivian always wore. He wondered if she had gotten caught in a tree somewhere while trying to hide too carefully, but then he remembered, her claws were actually made from the power of Kimui. And that meant one thing, the ribbon was not just a coincidence but a clue. She left it for him. Looking around, he also found her tracks leading deeper and deeper into the forest. So he began following the tracks, and as he moved along them, he felt how all of this wildly echoed with nostalgia for the past. When he was a child, the two of them often ran like this in the sea of forest, and even in troubled times it was she who ultimately led him forward. Although she had lived for hundreds of years, she still remained in the form of a child then. It turns out the green goddess apparently did not have a fixed form. She took on the appearance of a human each time and even adjusted it to his age just to communicate and spend time with him. Even the grass he was looking for right now, he suddenly remembered. He found it by chance while playing with it in this forest. Because the sweet fruit was tightly wrapped in a hard shell. In this form, no person could eat it. Once he saw how a bird monster was preparing suido, but in fact, it was a magical creature. And it had strange habits. It flew over the jungles, collected seeds, and then grew them on its own territory. Incredibly, the farm bird managed to prepare suido on its own, using swamp water, leaves from the big jungle, and a breath of fire. Rudo and Vivian did get it, and as soon as they tasted it, the harsh nectar turned sweet and sticky, and moment by moment they realized it was incredibly delicious. But just one portion was enough, as each of their stomachs filled up to a fierce heat. And then he was caught when he was sneaking food. The hummingbird noticed this and they chased him relentlessly, leaving a bitter memory. And so he returned to the present and continued following her tracks until he came across another one of her ribbons. And judging by the traces of divine power left on it, he could say she was nearby, but still looked around in all directions. And he immediately recognized this place, Barura Wetlands. He immediately thought if he had continued wandering the forest blindly, he would never have reached here. Eventually, it turned out that Vivian was leading him to where he himself longed to go, even if she was a little angry with him. And for this he was truly grateful to her. Finally, he saw her. She was standing on a stone in the middle of the river. But when he saw that she was just standing still, he was gnawed by the question, why doesn't she run away, doesn't hide, and what maybe is she looking for? Suddenly, he noticed the plants growing right by her feet. And it was those suido he was looking for. He called out to her so that she would know he had finally found her. And he also sincerely thanked her for helping him so much. But she quickly waved her hand at him, be quiet, and he just couldn't figure out what exactly she meant by that gesture. Suddenly she lunged at him and ordered without unnecessary words simply, jump forward. He also felt trouble is already approaching somewhere. And without asking anything, he rushed to her a moment before he was hit by the monster's attack. She was glad that he managed to get there, because if he had been even a little late, he would already be dead. While he thought that in the Tata's forest the rule was to preserve life, one must instantly disappear, stopping running away from Vidian Sigmo. As it turned out, the monster was the same bird that works the field. He had encountered it back in childhood. Since they were already exposed, Vidian suggested simply getting down to business and merging together, and he himself was surprised that she was so actively and boldly enjoying the situation. She honestly admitted, yes, she was truly happy they played and hunted together and it brought back the good old times. He somewhat agreed, although it was still not quite the same as back then. But as soon as he looked back at the enemy in front of them, he realized its sharp beak and incredible agility were a completely different trouble than Rockbeer. The most important thing was that fighting against sky monsters was incredibly difficult. Green magic usually requires plants and its range is only short. Moreover, Hummingbird unleashed his deadly fiery breath. Infused with forest magic, it even surpassed the full power of the top mage of the royal capital, both in range and in strength. So Vidian asked what he would do next, because no matter how much he had tried since childhood, he had never managed to defeat the hummingbird and only had the option to run away. He admitted throughout his life he had only felt a terrifying premonition before monsters from the sky, but that did not mean he had learned nothing at the academy. Vivian also assured him that there was nothing to fear. She said she had indeed become much stronger than before and suggested facing it face to face. He also realized to take back that pseudo ceiling intact, he would have to fight the monster. And then, keeping this in mind, he prepared for battle. The hummingbird was flying straight at him and he just stood there. He decided to end this skirmish before it could gather momentum and unleash fiery breath. The bird struck him with its beak and the bait impact triggered. Leaving Vidian completely stunned, the watcher hummingbird quickly realized something was wrong. And it turned out, Ryudo folded the shield again, summoning it with the power of green magic, and he seized the agility of the hummingbird, trapped the creature inside, and forced it to get stuck, preventing movement. Still, he was surprised. Even after strengthening the defense much more than when repelling Rickbeer's attack, it still managed to break through the barrier, but most importantly, his plan worked. Now he had no chance to retreat. The beak was stuck in the self-repairing green magical shield, sustained by green magic. He tore off the higher spell's root entangle. The vine entwined him and he used this to catch the hummingbird and put an end to its movements. So he was confident he was about to win when suddenly, the bird broke its own beak just to break free, and it stunned him into complete silence, because he never even thought it was capable of that. Fortwing took a deep breath and Ryudo immediately realized that was exactly what she was about to do. That breath flared up like a flame, as if it had been deliberately ignited. And he and Vivian dashed away in fear. If it had hit them, it would have been the end. But as soon as they tried to do something, Hummingbird released fiery breath and hit them directly. The scorching tongues of flame burned everything around, leaving no room for pity or doubt. However, Ryudo still survived. He managed to create. He layered himself with a full armor, healing it with green magic. The spell was called Cradle of Nature. Even Vivian was impressed when she saw he managed to make armor that could withstand a furious fiery attack capable of incinerating a hummingbird. While he explained to her that if they could channel enough mana through the wooden armor, it would provide some resistance even against fire. And as soon as he noticed it, the armor began to burn out just as the same flame hit it. And he immediately started pulling it off. It was unbearably hot, and Vivian just laughed, watching him jump around. It was completely expected. Suddenly, the hummingbird tried to attack him again. It flew straight at him, and he somehow managed to dodge at the last second. He counterattacked with leaf blade magic, but the creature dodged each of them with extreme ease. Vivian said that green magic is not at all suitable against someone who can fly so freely in the sky. And since that was the case, she suggested, just return to the village and gather sweet grass under the cover of night. But he only took a deep breath, and glancing into his eyes, she already knew in advance what the answer would be. He was determined to shoot down that hummingbird right there, and that surprised her a little. She couldn't help but think how cool he had changed now, and wanted to forever engrave this figure in her memory. And it was then she saw him casting a spell on a tree and wondered what that was supposed to mean. She quickly warned him, the hummingbird is flying towards them again. And he immediately understood, his enemy was not only fast but also cunning and relentless. He had to change his strategy, so he used the colossal mana of the great forest to strengthen his body. Again and again, every time at the last moment, he dodged the strike, parried every attack that tried to hit him, and kept doing it. Vivian just froze seeing this. The hummingbird, as is known, was faster than sound itself. But yet he still remained unharmed. This was nothing new to him. Back at the academy, he had fought 1,000 times in mock battles against Phyllis, the very fencing genius. Her fencing changed every time and was extremely unpredictable. So even though the hummingbird was incredibly fast, he finally understood, a large body can sometimes be a weakness. Still, even though he was not hit, Vivian wondered how exactly he was going to bring down the enemy in the sky. Suddenly, Ryudo noticed the fighting style of Colibri had changed slightly. He had no idea whether she had switched to defense or was trying to charge an attack with fire, but whatever it was, waiting for her to relax meant only losing. So he decided to go on the offensive. But as soon as he took a step forward, he stumbled, fell flat, and collapsed. Vivian could not believe that he fell headfirst at that very moment, so she ordered him to get up while the hummingbird was watching, but he seized the chance and lunged straight at him. Vivian began to panic. She could do nothing physically to help him stand up again while the two of them were fused into one. But he remembered what his father had taught him long ago. Wild creatures always fought for their own lives, so if the prey showed even the slightest gap, they would have thrown themselves at it with everything they had. And the hummingbird behaved the same way. But it turned out Ryudo blocked the strike at the last moment, and it was a trap he had prepared in advance. At the cost of danger, he won himself a chance. Vivian also flinched as soon as he saw that he was using a broken hummingbird because a dagger even Ryudo fended off his attack. Wasting no time, he activated the spell he had cast on all the trees around them. He wove a prison from roots to lure and catch it there. It tried to break free, scorching with the flame from its fire breath, but it seemed to have no effect. And Ryudo admitted an incomplete fiery exhale would not burn them, because these giant trees of the enchanted jungle continuously sucked water from beneath the ground. So there was no escape. He immediately launched an attack and finished it off with a blade made from a leaf. He struck a direct hit and beheaded the hummingbird. Finally, victory was his. Having defeated the hummingbird, he quickly ran to its body to properly honor nature. Then he began to dissect the prey. As his father taught, first he let out the blood. After that, he started the autopsy. Its muscles, honed by forest mana, perfectly balanced with fat, and the brightly colored feathers and strong beak, he was sure all of this would be used for top-quality materials. Vivienne returned and came out to praise him. The skill was impressive, considering that no matter how much they tried before, they always lost to him. And she was truly glad that with each day he was becoming stronger. He just quietly explained he had studied all kinds of tactics and combat at the academy, So while they were in the sea of trees, he could manage on his own, and Shia thought that training and real practice were not the same at all. At first, seeing how he cast spells on the trees, Shia decided that he would have to fight a giant wooden soldier, but that would be a bad idea. The speed difference between the giant and the hummingbird turned out to be too great, and it was the worst matchup of opponents. Moreover, in such a clash, they would eventually destroy the environment of the Barura wetlands. But he did not rush blindly, he remained smart. He controlled several activations at once and trapped the hummingbird. She could say that during those past 4 years, while he was far from the forest, he had to make incredible efforts. And she added, besides magic, he improved and honed martial arts. Yet he remained modest and assured her that if there were several such girls, he would have to run away too. In the end, it all came down to one thing. Every day Phillies trained them using martial arts. As soon as he said this, she looked at him intently and began to interrogate whether it was true that he trained every day with a human girl. She wanted to learn more about his relationship with her, and he nervously clarified. To him, she was just a classmate. But she did not believe that it was really that simple and again started yelling at him. And he immediately disappeared from there, telling her to return home as soon as possible, otherwise the bird would spoil. She ran after him, shouting without stopping. Later they both returned to the field, and she noticed how he was planting something else instead of the sweet potatoes they had just harvested. She immediately asked what it was. He replied, first the field needs to be prepared. In his hand he had a whole bunch of worms. And suddenly they grew so huge that it completely threw her off track. Since the field was too wide, he decided to entrust the soil preparation to the same worms and further accelerate the process. He used green mana so they would grow bigger. And then she said that they needed to quickly plant sweet potatoes so they could return to the forest and play again. But there was another thought that gnawed at him from the inside. Sweet potatoes usually naturally grow in water, so if he was somewhat endowed with such an ability, the potatoes would not yield a harvest until the surroundings resembled a swamp. He began to think if there was a way to bring the field closer to wetland conditions. Vidiana really had an idea. Next to this field flowed a river, so she suggested digging a canal there and taking water, collecting it in one place. He also agreed if they could just create a canal and spread a thin layer of water, they could approach the wetland closer. Moreover, water was extremely necessary for Portho agriculture, so fields were developed precisely near rivers and ponds. He praised Vivian for coming up with such a wonderful idea, and then they set off to check the river. The river cut through the land what the ancestors had left, high, dense soil, and it was the dam that all this time protected the village from floods. Moreover, it was almost twice as high as him. You immediately understood. Cutting and redirecting the water flow without difficulties would not work. To prevent the village from flooding during heavy rains, they also kept a certain distance between it and the fields. Having weighed everything, he concluded, no matter how much he strengthened his body with green magic, he could not overcome this alone. But then Vidian poked him in the cheek and asked what exactly was bothering him, even though she was right there. He asked her if she would also help him, and she simply assured him, let her decide everything because she said it herself. He handed her the shovel and thanked her, as if everything between them was settled. He asked she agreed to help with all this heavy load while he immediately went to work himself, but that was not what she meant at all. And she threw that shovel right in his face. He said she needed to be careful with the agricultural equipment. After all, it was a lifeline for farmers. And she shouted at him and reminded him that she did not like doing hard work. He pointed out that she was the one who promised to help. Then she simply approached him and gave him a scratch again. She got angry with him again. She recalled the battle they had just fought against the hummingbird and said that, of course, birds that flew freely had never been such an easy target. That's why I gave the trees branches. At that moment, Ryudo finally understood what she meant. And he had an idea. He gathered the excess mana from everything that surrounded him. Engraved the image of the equipment during the reconstruction. The trees together transformed into giant wooden farmers. He was surprised that his plan really worked, and Vivian looked even more confused and sincere as she watched how he managed to summon 5 wooden figures at once. The problem was that now they would have to continuously supply these giants with high-quality mana, and if they made even one wrong move, everything could slip out of control. The giant began working immediately, and the two were very glad that everything was going as they expected. But at the same time, he realized carelessness would not be forgiven, otherwise the whole symbol would be flooded. Moreover, he thought to himself, Since he had already managed to grasp the magical structure of the living forest spell after a few attempts, maybe now he could add intricate movements just as he once improved magical execution. So he ordered each of them to dig up the top embankment, to make a tunnel and a water channel for water intake, build dams to hold the water and recreate the swamps, and also lay a drainage path downstream to adjust the water level. Although the wooden giants were doing their job properly, just watching them, Ryudo could not help but feel like he was being lazy. So he decided to help them too. But still, Vivian grabbed him back and pressed him to herself. He laid his head on her knees, ordered her to rest a little and leave all the hard work to the wooden giants. He always goes too far as soon as he gets involved in something. Besides, he had already wasted too much of his mana. She just wanted him to relax a bit. And in his mind, everything came together. She was really right, because just a few minutes ago he was fighting with a hummingbird, and now he was simultaneously summoning 5 wooden giants. He appreciated her for always taking care of him, and she replied, if he really wanted to prove he was grateful, he should give her a quiche on the lips. Suddenly he stood up, grabbed her by the chest, and pressed sharply against her closely. She, seeing how he behaved like that, got very scared and said she was just teasing him. She really wanted to, but she just needed a little time to gather herself. But he touched her lips with his finger and quietly asked her to close her eyes. She gave in and was ready for it. Her hopes shattered as soon as he said that the villagers were coming to them, and ordered her to immediately transform into a cat and hide. It was his mother and Mia. They rushed to run and see why the whole village was shaking, and were shocked to see that he had created 5 wooden giants. Meanwhile, he was hiding Vivian behind him. And he whispered to her to transform into a cat faster, and that really angered her. While everyone watched the giants do their work, Mia remembered. In legends and picture books, she had come across agricultural uses of green magic more than once. But she had no idea that such a thing could actually happen in real life. Ryudo explained to them that he is trying to grow a new crop called sudo, and uses the power of tree people to create the necessary conditions. Mina literally burst with joy upon hearing this and asked what kind of crop sudo it was. And he briefly told that he found several grains in swampy places and that the texture was completely new and incredibly tasty. She could not contain her excitement and squeezed his hand, poking with her finger in response. That he must definitely share at least a part with her when he harvests. She wanted to try cooking various dishes from the new ingredient. She was truly delighted with him. After all, he was step by step expanding the village's possibilities by planting all these new crops. And Ryudo just waved it off and laughed, stating that it was just luck. Suddenly Vivian appeared from behind his back and grabbed his shoulder. He was standing too close to Mia. Then his mother said how impressive the new way of using green magic was. Even if everyone in the village gathered for such a large construction, it would take many years to complete it. But his magic had almost finished everything. Ryudo admitted that he was a little worried himself because he left the main work to the wooden giant, and his mother dryly replied that he should be more confident. After all, he is doing everything with his own magic. She muttered to herself that probably his father is insanely proud of how his son gained such incredible power. But Ryudo actually did not hear this, so as before when he asked what she just said, she hid her tears and replied that it was nothing. Moreover, the wooden giants finally finished their work and he sincerely thanked them for their efforts. Finally, he installed a small dam at the entrance. And then he got a little closer to Barrow wetlands. The environment, almost night, enveloped everything around. And everyone finally decided to head back home before it got dark. Late at night, Mary was experimenting with her potions again, and once again another failure occurred. She was exhausted and wondered if what the witches of the royal capital claimed was true, and whether the universal remedy was just an illusion. Although she had failed 100 times already, she categorically refused to give up. The quantity and structure of this mana, which she got from Ryudo, felt as if the material came from another world. She tried to activate it, carefully pouring in just a little mana, afraid that an excess might cause an explosion. But nothing worked, so she poured all her power into it, trying to unlock its potential completely. It was truly frightening, but if she wanted to create a legendary potion, she had to take the risk, and she decided not to stop. As soon as she started, something strange began to happen with that part. And then everything flared brightly and immediately triggered a big explosion. Its echo spread like a wave throughout the entire village. And one by one, everyone came outside from their homes, looking at each other and trying to understand what had just happened. Ryu noticed smoke rising from the side where Mary lived and immediately became alarmed. Without hesitation, he rushed there. He hoped that everything would be fine with her, so he asked Vivian to provide him with physical reinforcement so that he could run even faster. When Ryu arrived at the place, he looked at the villagers and asked if they had seen Mary, who was coming out of there. But she was nowhere to be seen. People wondered if she had gotten trapped under something. The house was completely engulfed in flames, and the villagers repeatedly tried to extinguish the fire, but the fire did not retreat. They asked Rudo for help because the flames were too strong, and the self-defense squad without Mary also could not cope. She was the only one who knew how to use blue magic to extinguish fires in the village of Porto. Vivian did not know what to do next. There was neither fire-extinguishing magic nor green magic nearby. But instead of panicking, he calmed everyone down and confidently stated that there was no need to worry, he already had a plan. Everyone encouraged him and they believed. Now only he could handle this situation. First, he went ahead and borrowed some of Maria's herbs from what she grew in the garden. Vivian used green magic for the first time. The branches and leaves grew so rapidly upwards that they could cover the entire house. Then he launched an attack with his blade made of leaves. He cut the tips of these plants. To expand the root zone and strengthen all living things, he immediately brought groundwater to those plants, and then it happened. Countless branches and leaves closed together like a rain cloud about to pour. Water crashed down on the house, stopping the spread of the flames and immediately weakening their heat. All the peasants were stunned and eagerly praised him. Alvidian also said that from this they could extinguish the fire, but there was still one important matter he needed to complete. With green magic, he crafted himself strong armor from leaves. And with all his might, he rushed straight to the house. The peasants rushed to stop him, insisting that it was still too early and too dangerous to go inside. As if from the remaining heat, he would be roasted alive. And there was still plenty of smoke. It only further complicated his breathing. Of course, he did not listen to them. This leaf armor, which he himself had created, could disperse heat and purify the air around him. And yet the main thing, the building had already reached its limit, so he knew, to save Mary, there was very little time left. He quickly jumped inside, called her name and demanded an answer, where she was, but no one responded. And then he ran through in his mind, had she lost consciousness? It seemed the explosion happened due to a mana control failure. If that was true, then he concluded, she was somewhere in the atelier, and when he got there, it turned out he was not mistaken. Mary was right there, unconscious, and their chances turned out to be equal. He immediately picked her up in his arms, anxiously checking if she was all right. She was still breathing, and from that he exhaled with relief. And then she began to mutter quietly and, as if apologizing, felt guilty before him. He still couldn't. She had already failed at preparing the potion. He told her not to force herself to speak and assured her there was nothing to worry about. But at that moment he noticed something falling from the cauldron. The density of mana on this thing was simply off the charts, and he had no idea if it was the cause of that explosion. He had no slightest idea what it was, so he decided to lock it with green magic. His armor was already reaching the edge, so he had to flee immediately. At that very moment, Vidian ordered him to be extremely careful as soon as. After all, the mansion pillars were about to collapse right on him. And before he could take a single step, the entire estate crumbled and fell abruptly, and everyone froze in shock. And Mia wanted to go and find them, while the others tried to stop her. Suddenly, giant vines burst out from under the rubble, lifting the entire estate, and in the center of it all stood Rido. Everything was completely fine, and he was carrying Mary in his arms. Everyone was incredibly happy to see that he was okay. And everyone rushed to him to check if he needed medical help, but he said they should first prioritize Maria's treatment. Fortunately, among the crowd there was immediately a doctor. He stepped forward and examined her right there, without delay. While Dr. Maximilian carefully examined Ryuji, Rito asked how she was feeling. And Ryuji replied that it really was a mana outbreak. But thanks to his quick decisions and because he pulled her out of that place, she was not in any life-threatening danger, and Ryuji was glad to hear that. Moreover, he added, perhaps from now on she would never be able to rise as a witch again. This left him completely stunned. Apparently, the manacern inside her body was destroyed. And although some manacerns are capable of at least partially healing external injuries, here, the damage was too severe. Even the doctor sympathized with her. She was a true genius in her field. He was troubled by the thought of whether she was trying to create a high-risk mixture from rare ingredients, the very one that caused all this. At that moment, Ryudo realized what he had pulled from inside was exactly what she had been experimenting with. And as soon as he uncovered it, as expected, there was a Rickbeer's gallbladder, the very one he had given her. He was devastated and felt all this happened because of him. Although he knew that even a little of this jungle fuss of Tada could shift the balance of the outside world, he carelessly gave it to her. And now all because of his carelessness, she can never return to being a witch, although she lived so long exploring. Vivian kept trying to call him, but he did not hear her. And then she finally confessed and told him, just pull yourself together and stop. She assured him that if it were only 1 or 2 mana engines, she would easily rework them as long as she has spirit grass. Yet no peasant had seen this before, a wonder for everyone, without exception. They silently froze in place, confused faces and one single question: who is she, and where did she literally come from nowhere? But when she finally realized she had made a big mistake, an elder waved his hand and muttered, supposedly, spirit grass is pure nonsense. And although he seemed to feel the same grasping at straws, he still emphasized to both, spirit grass is just a fairy tale, nothing more. There was also a legend about a boy whose demon stole mana, and then everything turned into stew. She was led by the gods, and she encountered a spirit. When he drank the spirit tonic brewed by Elden Apothecary, he was able to absorb the magic of the very deities, and with this power saved the whole world. But in the end, it all turned out to be just a fairy tale, and the old man said that even children nowadays do not believe in it. Vivian got offended, he knows nothing at all, and then suddenly Ryudo hugged her from behind and quietly thanked her for giving him this chance. He asked the doctor to take care of Mary while he went further. He went out to find spirit grass. The doctor and even Mia said it was already too late, so he at least had to wait for dawn. Moreover, the doctor advised him to get treatment at his clinic. He said he might have been injured by the fire, but he did not listen to their words, and promised that he would return soon. Are you worried? Mia turned to her mother and asked if she minded him going out in such a state. But she knew better than anyone, if he reaches this critical step, no one can stop him. He goes towards danger to help others, and every time he does this, she mercilessly reminds her of his father. Therefore, she always had to hold him by the back. Vivian told him that the place where the spirit grass grew was very dangerous, and he did not dare at all. He only asked her to lend him her strength, and she, of course, agreed. He stubbornly decided to get that saffron spirit and protect Maria's future. And having considered all this, he rushed away. Later, Nia and Rito's mother took Mari home and asked Dr. Maximilian if she would be all right. He assured them there was no need to worry anymore, her wound treatment was already completed. Now she only needed to rest. But even after all he could do, he could no longer do anything about the damage to the mana engine. So there was only one thing left: to hope that Ryuto would find the spirit herb and return. He asked Vivian if she knew exactly where the spirit grass was, and she quickly explained, it lies southeast of the forest in Rascal Cave. He asked Vivian if she knew exactly where the spirit grass was, and she quickly explained, it lies southeast of the forest in Rascal Cave. But still, Vivian asked him to just calm down for a moment and suggested spending the night somewhere safe. After all, at night the forest was full of fierce monsters. As soon as she said this, a moon wolf jumped on him from behind. Vivian was so busy calming him down that she did not even manage to notice his arrival in time. And she quickly warned him, turn around and watch what is behind. And he knocked him out with one blow, loudly declaring that he had no time to deal with people like him. He already felt, somewhere in the bushes, many more like them were lurking, so he called everyone, telling them to come out. Vivian froze as soon as she saw that there were so many. They surrounded them from all sides. While Ryudo casually muttered that he would take them all out at once, she reminded him, these were a pack of moon wolves from the Sea of Trees, and she advised, let him lure them out one by one. But of course he did not listen to her, and when the wolves rushed at him all together, it was too late to change anything. He was ready to fight back. Vivian kept urging him, saying he was too reckless and needed to understand how formidable they were. But they were, he had fought them many times before. And suddenly, at the very moment when they were already ready to attack him, he released his Thorn of the Tarrant, Pheromonica, and met them with a swarm of vines that tightly intercepted their movements. Vivian was completely stunned seeing all this, and she could not believe that even the moon wolf of the Juka was unable to break these bonds. At that moment she realized, Ryudo's rage only fuels it. It rises again and again like a wave, but each of its surges is pathetic, with a taste of bitter sorrow. When he caught all the moon wolves, he told them that he had no intention to fight, he just needed to help his friend right now. He looked them all straight in the eyes and warned, if they dared to interfere again, he would lay down their lives with all his might. At these words, the moon wolves began trembling with fear, and he just turned around and walked away. Vivian said that he was still bleeding from the spot where the wolf had bitten him. But he was not worried. He assured her that everything was fine. As he was enhancing his natural healing power, everything should heal quickly. The only thing that really concerned him was that Mary was in pain. Compared to that, everything else was trivial. He tore forward relentlessly, accelerating with his green magic. He thought that he needed to hurry immediately and save her, because his carelessness had led to all this, so he had to somehow make amends. And Vivian insisted that he should not blame himself so much. Maria was also happy when she received that gift from him. Moreover, he had already spent so much magic in one day, and she was very worried about his energy reserves. He understood her anxiety, but he only wanted to shorten the time when Mary was overwhelmed by worry, even just a little. Therefore, he did not intend to stop until he found the spirit potion. Vivian realized arguing with him was pointless, and she herself survived when he sometimes pulled such stunts. But suddenly she broke the fusion with him and jumped outside. Confused, he asked what she was doing. And with tears in her eyes, she said that she loved him more than anyone else. That is why she asked him for forgiveness for what she had done. And she also cast a spell on him, from which he fell into a trance. Sometimes he focuses so much on helping someone that he ruins everything happening around. She could not help but remember the very moment when they first met. Before meeting him, she was just green. Green goddess who existed in forests all over the world. She was the guardian of nature, sent by the great goddess Adele, and leaving the domain assigned to her meant death. When she was entrusted with Tatis Sea of Trees, everything around still smelled of novelty, and she ran through the forest every day, as if responding to the shadow of every step. But time passed. After 100 years of solitude, she had studied the forest inside and out, from all its secrets to the smallest laws moving beneath the bark. And eventually, there was no longer a single thing in that forest that could ignite her interest. She heard how the wind carried tales of friendship and love between goddesses and humans, but the forest where she lived was a completely different world. Not only did a mighty whirlpool of manatees exist here, driving people mad, it was also guarded by a strong barrier established by Lord Adele. So meetings with people there were just another dream within a dream, and just like that, without a single word, the same days passed by again and again. The moment came when her patience with everything snapped so much that even moving became a real torment for her. And she just sat alone, losing track of time and having no idea how many hundreds of years had passed. But one day she felt mana, which she herself did not even know about. She literally blazed with joy and knew for sure she had to check it because Gadian was her important work. She clearly felt this was not a random company but truly a strong group, since they managed to break through the Adele barrier. Looking at the metal equipment, she involuntarily thought, could these be the very travelers everyone was talking about, the famous adventurer party? She waited to see how far they would go into the forest, but in the end, everything went differently. They all surrendered without hesitation to the forest herald guardian Rock Bear. For a moment she almost reached out to help, but even if they managed to survive this crisis, she still knew the same would happen next. And the fact remained, weak people do not survive in this forest. Her only hope to break these boring days was people, but when she saw how they all were beaten like that, she immediately understood. In the end, it was just an illusion. Time passed, and every moment she held on to hope became even more painful, so she simply decided to end it. But at that very moment, she heard a voice. A baby was looking for someone. As soon as the sounds reached her, she turned around to see where the voice was coming from. The boy was shouting incessantly, urging someone, "Come out of that shelter already." She could not believe that such a small child could slip through the barrier. It turned out that he was looking for a girl. She was stubbornly crying somewhere over there. In Vivian's place, he would immediately start guessing whether he had gone into the forest all alone just to find her. She immediately dismissed this thought and decided, maybe it was just the influence of the person of the world, causing a complete mess in the head. Moreover, she was completely in harmony with nature, so a human child had no chance to see or hear her. But it was then that he really saw her. She was standing on the top of the cliff and pointing her hand in his direction. He told her to just wait for him right here. Meanwhile, she was completely stunned and could not even begin to understand how he could have seen her at all. She remembered that a long time ago she had heard from Adele about a small farming village nearby Portos, on the edge of the Sea of Trees. The local inhabitants worshipped the green goddess and her domains, and the Tatis Sea of Trees was considered forbidden territory. So the lonely green goddess spent 500 years alone. With a mighty barrier and terrible legends, no peasant dared to approach the Sea of Trees. But then a small child appeared before her, and the goddess could not understand how exactly he saw her. In any case, she decided to quickly change her appearance so that he would feel familiarity with her. He climbed onto a rock and, excitedly stumbling, hurried to her, but then he saw her face and asked why she was crying. She finally showed him her face and shouted that she was not crying, but the tears still could not stop and continued to flow from her eyes. And she herself did not notice how long these tears had been going on. When boredom accumulates, it turns into loneliness, and it seemed to her that this is exactly how solitude should feel. Young Rydao said that her pretty face was ruined by all these tear stains, and she just blushed upon hearing him call her pretty. He pulled out a handkerchief and wiped her tears. But then he suddenly got a little confused. These tracks would neither come off nor wash away. And just as he started to rub harder, it became painful to scrape her skin. Then she shouted at him and said, if he wipes so roughly with that rag, their skin will suffer. He quickly apologized and explained that he was just trying to do the same as his father. Since that was the case, she decided, his father is a true gentleman. But anyway, she asked if he was not afraid to come all the way here, and he in response only asked what was so scary about this forest. She could not believe that he still understood nothing, so she simply said, look behind you. As soon as he turned around, that big stone bear monster appeared before him. This completely stunned him. He was thoroughly frightened and fell down. Barely quiet, she explained to him, right now in her head he is being hunted by a monster. She understood the same way. Technically it was her fault because he got lost in the forest, so she could not abandon him right now. But to her surprise, he quickly got up and offered to cover her, reasoning, if monsters are servants of the witch, then it turns out the witch took her away. He heard that the forest witch catches children to eat them or turn them into her own monster. And Vivian could not even begin to find out where these exaggerated rumors came from. Ryudo had his special flash drive and a smoke bomb in his pocket, and he used it to blind the monster in front of them, grabbed her by the hand and pulled forward. He said this was their chance to break free, and they took off running. He had already managed to come up with a whole story in his head and realized, as soon as the witch captured her, she was probably terribly tormented by loneliness, crying all the time, crying and crying. She tried to explain to him that it was not like that at all. And then he said that he had actually heard her crying for years but never managed to find her. So as soon as she heard that he had been looking for her for years, she immediately apologized for coming so late. A few years passed and she got upset again, thanked him for searching for her. She just wanted to hold his warm palm, but she understood. She was the green goddess. So, gathering her strength, she briefly warned him that there were many fierce monsters in this forest. And he already knew all this and only added that he had no chance of escaping alone. Then he came up with a plan and said they had to play hide and seek with the monsters, and these words made her even more confused. With the help of green magic, he made himself a cloak and proudly boasted, no one had ever won against him in hide and seek. He was so skilled that even his father gave up when trying to find him. She just froze. Despite his youth, he easily controlled green magic. And suddenly she had a thought, maybe his appearance in the forest was not an accident and not just bad luck. But maybe this meeting was true destiny, just like that. The two of them continued running away from every monster that crossed their path, whether it was a giant stone bear or moon wolves, and for the first time, Vivian truly enjoyed herself. Next to Ryudo, she felt as if time simply flowed, and she was experiencing the happiest and brightest moments she had ever had. And a little later, a bunch of monsters completely surrounded them both. And he realized the beasts of this forest have an extremely sensitive sense of smell. Vivian thought to herself that this was probably the point where her little adventure with him ended, so she said, just faster and run away. Without hesitating for a second, he refused to do that. Instead of fleeing, he stepped toward her to protect her, saying that he had promised his father never to abandon anyone who is crying. While he was saying all this, she saw he was clearly trembling, and she told him not to overdo it. He honestly admitted he was really afraid of those monsters but simply could not lead his older sister. So he rushed forward and tried to push away the bear rolling along with the stone. He resolutely declared that he would protect her at any cost so that she would never be alone again. And that really threw her off, left her speechless. Seeing his futile attempts, the monsters just laughed at him. And just then Vivian called him from behind and said, "It's too early to worry about her." She radiated divine light and ordered all the monsters to retreat from the child and go away. The monsters were scared of her and immediately fled back, running away from there, and Ryudo simply froze in amazement, seeing everything that happened at that moment, and asked if that was really her true power. She finally revealed to him her real name, the witch from Mora of the Rotten Forest, and advised him to just get out of there before she eats him or kidnaps him, as the rumors said. He spoke, but he from the other side was not going to retreat. On the contrary, he got excited, took her by the hand and began to praise her, saying how incredible it was that she managed to drive away those forest monsters just by releasing mana. He was sure she was definitely stronger than his father, and he thanked her for saving his life. Finally, he introduced himself to her and asked her name, while she was thinking about his warm hands even though he was so small. She called herself Vivian, and he froze upon hearing that she had the same name as the green goddess. In her mind, an understanding was already forming. Everything went wrong. First, he was not supposed to see her at all. To fix this, she decided to drive him away and set a barrier so strong that he would never be able to approach again. But as soon as the words left her mouth, they turned out to be completely opposite, and she asked if he wanted to be her friend. She herself did not know why she said that, so she quickly tried to put everything in order. She meant something completely different. And he simply agreed instead, probably because they got along so well. And with a bright smile, he looked ahead. Tomorrow he would play with her again. And again she was completely overwhelmed by him. Tears suddenly flowed from her eyes. It was the day when she was finally freed from her 500 years of loneliness. After that, he began to go into the forest almost every day, and together they combed through mysterious corners. They climbed trees to eat fruits and nuts, and she found it incredibly fun. She loved his company so much that she wanted to be with him forever. But then he shared with her the decision he had made for his life. He decided to go to the royal capital to become a great mage who protects the entire kingdom. She knew this day would come sooner or later, and she understood that she could not cry in front of him. She had to see him off with a smile. And so, holding back her emotions, she encouraged him and was sure he would definitely become a great sorcerer. The day came when he finally left the village, and at that moment she felt that she would never see him again. Therefore, when she finally reunited with him after 4 years, she was filled with incredible happiness. And he, meanwhile, had already returned to the present, peacefully sleeping on her lap. She saw, in these 4 years, he had grown incredibly, and at the same time, his good heart had not changed at all. She honestly rejoiced to notice it. He pulled her out of the abyss of 500 years of solitude and just as relentlessly helped many people without turning his thoughts to himself. She knew she would not be able to stop him when he was saving the future of Murray under no circumstances. What but still spirit grass, which was pulled from the deepest part of Raskor Cavern. She was there where she did not even want to step. The green mana was too thin, and the creatures were insanely fierce. And in this dead silence lurked a terrible threat. Exactly so the exhausting night finally ended, and Ryudo woke up. He remembered that he was looking for someone or something, and for this, he raced through the sea of trees at night without a single worry. Vivian tried to calm him down, but he stubbornly ignored her and continued to do so. It was enough to just start thinking about Maria's suffering. Her dreams were taken away, so he could not stop. No sooner had he thought this than he suddenly remembered. The spirit herb had to be used urgently. He tried to get up but almost immediately realized his body was locked by magic. Neither his movements nor his own body obeyed him. He did not understand what had happened until he saw a video above himself. She urged him not to move and said she would not allow him to move until he calmed down. He realized this was not just pressure. In fact, Vivian's magical pin was pressing him to the spot. And he remembered how it worked. Human magic transforms mana, dressed from great nature, into magical power through the mana core in the body, and spells and techniques also multiply its effectiveness. Still, for a goddess, they did not have a man from the core because they were the embodiment of nature. Right now, Vivian was casting the proper spells and rituals, twisting huge masses of mana into the form of magic that struck the human body. Doing something like this is nothing less than a denial of one's own existence, an act that gnaws at the very foundation of life. Only realizing the danger she was putting herself in, he began to beg, stop the magic, and promised that he would calm down. With a sad expression, she asked if he would really keep his word. He nodded. He would keep it and emphasized that he had sworn never again would he allow her to make such a face. She rejoiced hearing that he still remembered this and turned off her magic. As soon as she did this, she immediately fell and fainted from exhaustion. Later, he made his way through the forest, carrying her in his arms. And when she woke up, he apologized to her for being so reckless. Yes, despite the doctor saying there was no need to worry about Mary's life, he fussed, ignored all her advice, and endangered them both. For that he was truly sincerely sorry. Ange. and she assured him that everything was fine. After all, that was exactly how he always loyally held on to others, straight as an arrow, like an idiot, and it made him such a great person. However, she was ready to set off for Spirit Grass and immediately told him, for this mission, they would need his usual energetic mood as well. But before moving on, he admitted that he had only heard about Spirit Grass and the tales from others' words. This made her a little angry. It turned out he doubted her words, even though she had agreed. After all, Spirit Grass was truly rare, blooming only once every 100 years. He listened to her and explained, to grow Spirit Grass, an incredible amount of underground mana and complete darkness were needed, so it turned out that the only place where it could grow was the depths of Rascal Cave. It was so deeply embedded in the forest of trees that it was completely dark there, and even in the deepest parts, no green magical catalyst worked. Realizing this, Ryuta understood, if they just went in there it was the end. Without green magic, they simply would not survive a fight with the forest monsters. Vivian explained that with mana present, they could strengthen their own bodies. But the monsters in that cave were cunning and incredibly strong. She herself did not want to go there. It was creepy. He had no doubt at all wasn't that the intuition of the goddess herself. But he still was not going to retreat, because the future fate of Mary was under threat. And so, as soon as they reached the edge of the cave, Ryuta gathered himself as best he could and prepared to dive inside. Green magic flared up and he created a mighty wooden sword and a wooden shield. Moreover, he covered both himself and them with concealment magic just in case the monsters suddenly suspected something. Then he planned to disappear and buy a few minutes. Finally, he entered the cave and froze in surprise because it was far too dark there. If he had not used night vision, he would have been sure. He would have long since lost his mind. The deeper he plunged into that cave, the foggier the forest mana became, and simultaneously a strange feeling of dread appeared. He could not understand where it came from. Above the cave, stone pillars were neatly broken, and several scratches were visible on the ground. He realized these were the tracks of the monsters that live here, and he could not fathom what kind of creatures they were and how large they could grow. But just as he was about to answer his own thoughts, he simply stumbled upon a gigantic serpent-like monster. It lay across the path. He was shocked. It was simply colossal. He could not even imagine what could be fed to it to stretch to such proportions. He recalled the rumor about the silver serpent, an ordinary monster in those parts. But how could it be tens of times larger than those encountered outside? He tried to pull himself together. From its breathing, it was clear the serpent was asleep. So he decided to quietly and carefully slip past it. After all, his goal was only to collect Spirit Grass. But then Vivian said that she had already come across this very serpent before. She asked if they should dismantle it while it still lay peacefully. And Ryuta was a little confused hearing this from her. He said that it was not like her to say such things and asked if something had happened the last time she met this monster. She could not remember everything clearly. Too much time had passed. The persistent discomfort from how this snake looked at her remained her only memory. Ryuta did not quite understand what to think about it, so she simply told him to rely on the goddess's sixth sense. And even if he attacked, he understood. Everything he did would only provoke her. And he was not at all sure if he could pierce her thick scales with his unfinished bodily enhancement magic and wooden sword. So he decided to focus only on the spirit that had already grabbed him. They really had nothing to worry about, and she agreed. Although for some reason she felt like something important was missing. When they passed by the snake, they noticed a shimmer somewhere in the distance, and from their earthy mana was bursting out. Without a doubt, they knew this was the flower that blooms in the cave where light does not reach. It was the legendary spirit flower they had been searching for so long. He rushed to it and could not believe it. They had really found the rare spirit flower which, as they said, blooms only once every 100 years, and so quickly at that. And he set out to pluck it, comforting himself. Soon this engine of Mary's men would finally be revived. But suddenly the silver snake woke up and slid right into his back, even before he could reach the flower. Ryuta froze. He didn't even manage to think how a creature of such size could move so fast, especially one that had just woken from hibernation. The serpent did not hesitate. It immediately spat poison right at him, and Ryuta managed to block it just in time. But it was not ordinary poison. It corroded the shield as if it were made of butter. He felt it then. That would happen because his enhancements still weren't enough, and Vivian had directly advised him to run quickly. But as soon as the serpent spoke and declared that it had only come to check if any prey had fallen into its trap, it was surprised itself. a human stood before it, something that happened very rarely. Ruta froze in confusion, seeing that it could even speak, but quickly recalled. The magical beasts of this forest had lived here for hundreds of years and possessed high intelligence. A telling example is Queen Melisande, and as last time he thought again, this whole matter could be resolved through conversation. He began by apologizing to the serpent for disturbing its hibernation, then explained he really needed the spirit flower for a friend. In return, he was ready to give anything. But the serpent just laughed and cut him off. Everyone who came here told him the same thing just to flatter him. She didn't need any of his things, and she promised, if they could entertain her, they could take that spirit herb. Ryoto began to guess what exactly they could do to entertain it, and the serpent replied, even a simple dance would be enough. Suddenly it released poison at the spirit flower to destroy it, and that was shocking. Ryoto instantly rushed for cover, shielding the flower with his own body. And since he could not use green magic there, he concentrated all his mana on strengthening the body. And as soon as he managed to strike her with poison, Vivian broke free from the body and took the poison upon herself. He saved her life again and again began to worry about her. He asked if she felt pain anywhere if the sensations were not subsiding. He felt helpless. He experienced complete powerlessness because he had no aptitude for other types of magic. While she calmed him down, saying everything would be fine because she had Kamui protection, the poison and pain did not become an unbearable problem for her. For now, the serpent laughed wildly. He was shaking from shock. He had personally caught the green goddess. After that, Ryudo finally understood everything, and control began to slip from his hands. He twisted his mana so skillfully that it looked as if he was falling into hibernation, and during this he made them go deeper. He enjoyed catching his desperate reactions like bait, using the spirit herb. And there was no for the sake of territory protection, just as it was not hunting to feed himself. It was outright mockery of human life for his own pleasure. And since that was so, Ryudo decided to show him what a real dance is, and put an end to it forever. Next, they unfold a bit from the past of Silver Serpent. He recalls the good times when he was still little. Hunting always fascinated him, but his prey always escaped from him scared, swift, without chances. But after one point, his whole life boiled down to prayers to motionless beings, and he grew utterly tired of it. He could not endure that boredom and decided to leave the forest completely, so he entered this dark cave. And one day, a strange flower with unusual mana spirit grass bloomed there. After that, animals came to him one by one, hoping to use his power to heal their wounds and illnesses. The mother bear and the stone bear, those who wanted to save their child. Nearby wolves eager to protect their mates, not a trace of cowardice in their forest form. But there was no sign that they were fleeing, even when they realized he was already near. On the contrary, with trembling legs they challenged him. And no matter how much they were beaten, no matter how badly wounded, they got up again each time, stubbornly, without retreating. Even though he was indifferent to the spirit planet, he tormented hopeless animals and shattered their hopes, devouring their companions right in their gaze. He began to live, keenly catching that tiny dance of despair, and finally understood. It is for this desperate movement that he lives. This went on day after day. He waited for new impressions to arrive and held on only to this waiting. But one day, right before him, a woman suddenly appeared. Her mana was so dense that it immediately became clear. Before you stood the green goddess herself. But she did not come alone. She was pulling along an elf, a rather rare thing. He immediately guessed that she came for the spirit flower to also heal that elf, and just the thought of it made him burn with heat. Now he had a chance to hunt the goddess. He began to invent various ways to torture her. To strangle her slowly or give a quick death. These were the thoughts spinning in his head. He still remembered what they said, green goddess feels nothing. And suddenly he became curious how long that carefree face would hold up once he had her in his hands. He just couldn't wait. And he wanted to immediately twist the expression on her face. But suddenly, she stared sharply at him, and this completely threw him off track. There was no expression in her eyes, just one look was enough for him to understand. Before him was the face of a dead person. Moreover, to his surprise, she simply threw that elf in the cave and headed back. He tried to stop her and questioned her, but it was all in vain. In fact, he was going to leave his friend there, although a magical plant capable of saving her life was nearby. But she didn't even look back. She kept walking forward, ignoring any words. The way she simply ignored him made him even angrier. And this moment became the greatest humiliation of his entire life. Since then, he no longer allowed the elf she left to rest. He was sure everything was done for that elf. One day the goddess will definitely return, and when that happens, He will take revenge on her, and returning to the present time, he could not control his excitement when he saw the green goddess before him again. This time he swore to twist that face into the most exquisite agony. By the glow in her eyes he immediately understood. She was too attached to that human resolver. Therefore he decided to attack first. He wanted his despair to be more noticeable and grow even stronger. Ryudo intercepted the incoming strike with a wooden sword and spent all his green mana on it, strengthening his own body. But that was not enough. Without nourishment from plants, it was already incredibly difficult for him to maintain defense, while the serpent only grew more heated, watching him exhaust himself. It was then that Vivian stood up again and called to the serpent, forcing it to pay attention to her. Riva reminded her, magic cannot be used because through it even her own existence begins to collapse, and she had known this for a long time. Yet with tears in her eyes, she shouted that she could not just stand aside and watch him die. That was exactly what the serpent wanted to see. It sought to further twist that face until it plunged into complete madness. And suddenly he realized the body no longer obeys. He had not the slightest idea what was happening to him. It turned out the elf had finally awakened from her rest and accused the serpent of ruining her lovely dream. She told him to be quieter now because she was going to sleep, and if he wanted to be loud, he should just go home. But the serpent, on the contrary, literally froze in place, and he was in shock. After resting for hundreds of years, the elf woke up just now and at an inconvenient time. He was desperate to get away while his precious prey was tearing away from him, as if escaping was easier than death. But instead, as soon as he turned away from the prey, Ryudo dashed forward like a whirlwind, sword in hand, and everything was decided in one step. And he plunged a knife right into his left eye, causing the creature to choke on a scream from unbearable pain. For him, these were eyes of great value. Through them, he saw how the blade cut through their face, full of torment. Ryudo immediately asked Vivian to grab the spirit herb while the chance still remained, and she had already started working. While she rushed to the flower, she managed to order the elf, just hold the serpent a little longer, and that was too much for her. She had just gotten out of bed and her mana power was already very low. Vivian tried to pull out the spirit flower, and to her own surprise, she could not hold her breath. It turned out to be incredibly difficult. Although the flower was so delicate, she clung with all her might to every moment, fought, pulled. Ryudo ordered again, "Hurry, do not delay." And at that very moment, the elf exhausted his mana, and the serpent pushed him away. The serpent wrapped its tail around all three of them. He squeezed them in his tail to crush them together right on the spot. Ryudo quickly asked Vivian to merge with him. As soon as she did, he poured all his strength into this physical enhancement to stop the serpent's tail and prevent them from being crushed. The elf woman was also amazed. So much incredible mana was oozing from there, but she could not understand why he was using green magic precisely where there were no plants and everything seemed completely useless. He had already heard about this at the academy, but now was not the time for talk, and he ordered her to just run away. But she, on the contrary, actually had a talent for him, and she gave him a ring called the Ring of Dew. It was a magical tool that recolors mana, so she asked him to pour all the green mana he had left into that ring. He had no idea what kind of ring it was or what it was capable of, but he still decided to trust her and released all his mana into it. Suddenly, flames burst out from all sides, and the serpent's tail flared up with bright fire. The bastard had not the slightest idea what the hell was going on and how they even managed to pull red magic out of nowhere. Even though he felt only green mana from Ryudo and from the green goddess, his proud scales still burned. And the flames also slipped through the cracks in the scales, burning him from the inside. He had no choice but to unfurl his tail, and he cursed everyone for driving him into such pain and for pulling such treacherous tricks. But before he could understand anything, Ryudo was already standing right on his head. "And you reminded him that he was the one who toyed with other people's lives. If he was not afraid to do that, then you told the snake let him be ready that his own life will be taken away too." The monster begged him to stop and admitted his complete defeat. He just broke down in tears. He pleaded for mercy, begging to spare his life, and repeated, everything he did happened only because loneliness was unbearable. And yet there were many moments when he was already on the verge of madness. And he asked, is it even possible to comprehend that grief, to spend hundreds of years and days without any changes? These words hit Vivian very hard. Once her life was exactly the same as his. And she had a fleeting question: if she had not met Ryudo on that fateful day, would she have become just like that snake? Seeing this, she asked him to spare the snake. He asked in surprise why. She explained, their goal is only spirit grass, so now everything is fine. and she reminded once again he himself said that there is no use in killing without a reason. She said it herself. He did not argue, agreed, and the elf questioned them whether they seriously planned to allow this monster to live. Ryudo said that technically it was their fault. They climbed into his nest without permission. So this could have simply been let slide, but he insisted on his. That Zimi give him a promise to no longer play with lives. And he immediately agreed, promising that from now on he would never do this again. Moreover, he also explained to them that there is actually a clever trick for gathering spirit grass. They were shocked by this, but at the same time it became clear why it was only possible to pull him out by force. There was simply no easier way. And he clarified, if you look more closely, you can see how it releases complex mana. And the whole trick was that they needed to decipher the ratio of his mana. He asked them to move a little towards the edge of his mouth to have a clear view. But they were not at all sure about the trick he was explaining, and it was then that the serpent said that it was all just a fairy tale. Suddenly he opened his mouth hand Ryudo, and the elf fell right inside. Ryudo instantly pushed the elf away and saved her from being eaten. But he still could not save himself. The serpent laughed and mocked them, sarcastically asking if they really thought he would abandon everything he was. The look of fear that had just frozen on the elf woman's face was exactly what he had come for, but he was sorry that through it all he could not make out the face of the goddess. That was his main goal. In the end, no matter what, he was still satisfied with what he got. And yet suddenly Rito spoke in his head. He said that the Manat stream really flows according to the stream of thought, as Melisande claimed. He felt as if he were in the belly of a snake, and from there clearly saw how his own mana was overflowing with dirty, poisonous anger. The snake had not the slightest idea of what was happening inside him, but suddenly felt his stomach burning. Rito began humming the fiery spell, and the monster again began to beg for life, swearing that it was truly the last time. But for this dirty beast there was no second chance. Rito grabbed Crimson Red and fired. Flame from inside the snake's stomach burst out and engulfed him completely until it put an end. She froze on the spot from shock, seeing such a mighty red magic hand from the power of the flare. Immediately realized, this is Hellflame. Even among the Elds who could skillfully perform magic, this supreme spell was only within the power of a few chosen ones. And then Rito appeared. At first she thought he was just an average guy with a lot of mana, but in reality he hid an incredible talent for magic. Having emerged from those flames whole and unharmed, he, it turns out, reached for desires he has no right to pursue, and she immediately understood this. In her thoughts, bitterness burned her. She had made a terrible mistake by giving the magic ring of due to exactly such a person, and now it seemed to her that he had to endure cruel discrimination just because he could only use green magic. She could already easily imagine, here he comes to his Raven D reckoning as soon as he receives the throne of his domain, and he will keep her as a slave every time she continues to make magical tools for him. When he approached her, she was immediately seized by nervousness. But with a big smile on his face, he sincerely thanked her for lending him such a valuable ring. She was completely twisted with shock. He returned it to her and said that for him it was a dream come true, because now he could use red magic with that rare magical instrument. But she couldn't believe it, that he would just, on his own, simply take and give her such a powerful artifact, and she wondered if he was an idiot or what this was all about. He praised Elden technologies even more because he could not even imagine that there was a dry fact capable of transforming mana, and she proudly retorted, only a master of her level can create something like that. And then. But suddenly the rings flew apart lengthwise and both hung suspended, stunned. He immediately began apologizing to her, and she could not even imagine how much flattery he poured into it, the level of such a masterpiece that just took off, and realized his hidden abilities were simply impossible to comprehend. But this did not change the fact that she was truly angry at him. She demanded compensation because these things were really hard to make, and he did not even have enough money to pay her in full. It was then that a voice called her and commanded, "Enough already." Vidian finally returned outside and showed that if it were not for Rudo, who defeated that snake, she would also now be in the stomach of that viper. The elf even shuddered upon seeing the green goddess before her, and despite the fact that her appearance had changed greatly since their last meeting, she was still recognizable. It was indeed Vidian. But Vivian did not even remember her, and with an absolutely stone face asked who she was. This question left her completely devastated. She introduced herself, Ronix, an elf from the settlement of Kamani, which stood on the edge of the forest. Hearing the name of her village she barely recalled, somewhere on the eastern side of the Great Forest, there really was a settlement colony. But she also remembered something else: that land was destroyed by a single tribe about 300 years ago. And Ronix was shocked to learn that she had been arrested for 300 years. But she paused and dismissed it, reminding Vivian, when she fled the village, it was Vivian who allowed her to hide in this cave. Vivian was simply stunned to hear that then, and even now she remained just like that, compassionate, as if she remembered how she once did something similar. Ronix was glad that finally those same things were returning to her. But again Vivian told her that she still could not remember it, and again shattered her hopes. Even Rito said that she was too cruel, but she could not cope with it. Then she was almost interested in nothing. Since nothing could be done, he decided. So Vivian saved Ronix even before the elves were completely destroyed. Since she herself had no memories, she agreed, so that is exactly how it happened. Considering this, since she saved her life, the girl stepped closer and said that Ronix should at least show gratitude, while Ryudo tried to stop her, explaining she was already going too far for someone who did not even remember the whole story. And Ronix did not think about it at all. She was only happy to see that she finally remembered at least a part, so, crying hard, she began to thank her. So all the formalities were read, and Vivian suggested hurrying to get the spirit grass before any more monsters appeared.